Give me
Grace
the
Mercer
keys,
woke
now.
up on her
No, they're
21st
not
birthday
yours.
and
I
immediately
said
wished she
now!
hadn't. Not because of pain, not because of fear, because waking up meant counting. Counting the money she had left. Counting the hours until hunger turned from a dull ache into something that made her hands shake so bad she couldn't hold a cup of water. Counting the days since anyone had spoken her name like it mattered. $60. That's what sat on the overturned milk crate next to her sleeping bag. 320s wrinkled soft from too many desperate hands. She smoothed them against her thigh and whispered what she whispered every morning. Still here. It wasn't a celebration. It was a dare aimed at the universe, aimed at everyone who'd ever written her off, aimed at herself mostly. The part of her that sometimes thought disappearing for real would be easier than this slow, invisible version she'd been living for the past 6 months. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not real food. A gas station hot dog wrapper sat crumpled in the corner of the condemned trailer she'd been sleeping in, licked clean of mustard and whatever grease had soaked through the paper. That was yesterday's dinner. Today, her stomach didn't even growl anymore. It had moved past growling into something quieter, something that made her thoughts blur at the edges and her fingers tingle when she stood up too fast. "Happy birthday to me," she said to no one. The trailer didn't answer. It never did. Just sat there with its broken windows patched with cardboard and its door that only locked if she wedged a folding chair under the handle. No electricity, no running water that worked. A roof that leaked in 3 places when the monsoon rains came, which they hadn't yet because April in southern Arizona was still dry enough to crack skin and bake asphalt into something that stuck to the soles of shoes. 6 months ago, Grace Mercer had a roof. Not a good one. Not one she'd chosen, but a roof. The Arizona foster care system had kept her contained for 20 years. Not safe. Contained. There's a difference, and every kid who's ever been in the system knows exactly what that difference tastes like. Different homes, different zip codes, same feeling. Temporary. That was the word that defined everything. Temporary placement, temporary family, temporary hope that lasted exactly as long as it took for the next caseworker to show up with a clipboard and a new address. She'd been in 11 homes, 11 different bedrooms that were never hers, 11 different kitchen tables where she sat with her hands in her lap and tried to figure out the rules before the rules figured out how to hurt her. Some homes were fine, quiet, forgettable. The kind of places where people did the minimum and collected the check and nobody pretended it was anything more than what it was. Some were worse. She didn't think about those. She'd built walls around those memories a long time ago. Thick ones, the kind that took years of survival instinct to construct, and she wasn't about to tear them down now. Not for anyone, not for anything. Her last placement coordinator, a tired woman named Diane who smelled like vanilla lotion and resignation, had packed up Grace's things with the efficiency of someone who'd boxed up childhoods 1,000 times before. "There's a transitional living program," Diane had said, taping a box shut without looking up. "You could finish your GED, get job training, have support while you adjust. I appreciate it." Grace had smiled, the smile she'd perfected at 14, the one that looked like gratitude but tasted like surrender. "I really do." Diane stopped packing, looked at her. Really looked with the kind of attention that caseworkers aren't supposed to have left after 15 years in the system. "You're 20 years old, Grace. You have no family, no savings, no support network. I have me. That's not enough. It's going to have to be." Diane had stared at her for a long time after that. Then she finished taping the box and said nothing else. Because what do you say to a kid who's been failed so many times that freedom, even the dangerous kind, even the hungry kind, feels safer than one more promise from a system that never kept a single one? Grace walked out of her last placement with 3 cardboard boxes, a GED, study guide she'd never finished, and one possession that mattered. A Polaroid photograph, faded, edges soft from years of handling. A blonde woman standing next to a tall man on a motorcycle. Their faces blurred by time and sun damage and the slow erosion of being carried in jacket pockets and tucked under pillows, and held up to bathroom mirrors in 100 different homes by a girl who was looking for something she couldn't name. But the woman's eyes, ice blue, stubborn, alive with something that looked like defiance and tenderness wrapped together so tight you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Those were Grace's eyes, The same eyes that stared back from every cracked mirror in every group home she'd ever slept in. She didn't know who the people in the photograph were. The photo was the only thing found with her at the hospital when she was 3 days old. Abandoned, no note, no name on the blanket, just a baby wrapped in a gas station fleece and a photograph tucked in beside her like someone was saying, "This is where you come from, even if you never find your way back." She kept it in her jacket pocket, against her heart, always. 6 months of freedom taught Grace exactly what Diane warned her it would. Freedom without money isn't freedom. It's just a different cage with no walls and no floor. She'd slept in a church doorway for 2 weeks until the pastor asked her to stop coming. Slept in a women's shelter until a woman 3 cots over stole her boots while she was showering. Slept behind a laundromat where the heat from the industrial dryers kept her warm at night until the owner found her and threatened to call the police. Then she found the condemned trailer in a park on the south edge of Tucson, the kind of place that doesn't appear on any map tourists would use. The kind of place where people mind their own business because their own business is hard enough without borrowing someone else's. Nobody bothered her because nobody saw her. That's the thing about being 21 and homeless. You're too old for the programs designed for children, too young for anyone to take seriously, and you exist in a gap the system doesn't have a name for. Inside that gap, you become invisible. Grace knew invisible. She'd been practicing her whole life. But she had one thing the intake forms never captured. One thing the caseworkers never wrote down. One skill that lived in her hands like muscle memory, like something her bones knew before her brain caught up. A foster father in Flagstaff, a man named Nolan, maybe 55. Quiet in a way that wasn't empty but full. The kind of quiet that comes from a man who spent decades listening to machines instead of people, because machines are honest about what's broken, and people almost never are. He had grease permanently embedded in his knuckles, the kind that doesn't wash out, because it's not dirt anymore, it's identity. He'd been a motorcycle mechanic for 30 years, ran a small shop out of his garage, took in foster kids because his wife had wanted to before she died, and he kept the promise, even after she was gone. Grace was 15 when they placed her with Nolan. She'd arrived the way she always arrived. Quiet, watchful, ready to leave before anyone could tell her to. But the first morning she'd walked outside and seen a motorcycle in the driveway. Not a new one. An old Sportster disassembled, spread across a tarp like a mechanical autopsy. And she'd stopped. Something about the way the parts connected, something about the precision of it. The fact that every single piece had a purpose, a place, a reason for existing. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative, everything essential. Nolan had come outside with coffee and found her crouched next to the engine block, tracing the cylinder fins with her fingertip. "Want to see how it breathes?" That's all he said. No introduction, no rules speech, no clipboard. Just an invitation to understand something that most people walk past without ever seeing. For 11 months, Nolan taught her carburetors and compression and timing. The language of machines that most people never learn because they never have someone patient enough to translate. He taught her how to read an engine, the way some people read faces, by listening to what it wasn't saying, by feeling where the hesitation lived, by trusting her hands to find what her eyes couldn't see. Broken things aren't trash, he told her once. Both of them, elbow deep in a Sportster engine that hadn't run in 4 years. Broken things are just waiting for someone stubborn enough to listen to what they need. She never forgot that. Nolan got transferred to Colorado before the year was up. The state moved Grace to a new home, a new school, a new temporary. She never saw him again. Never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell him he was the only adult who'd ever made her feel like she existed on purpose instead of by accident. Like she wasn't a file number or a placement or a problem to be managed, but a person whose hands could create something that mattered. She dropped out senior year when the latest placement fell apart, and the new school was 40 minutes away by bus, and the bus cost money she didn't have, and she just couldn't anymore. But she read constantly. Library books about engines and engineering and the physics of motion. She sketched motorcycles in a journal she kept hidden under her mattress. Drew engines from memory. Every valve, every gasket, every piece that connected to every other piece to make something dead come alive. Motorcycles don't need permission to exist, she'd written once in the margin of a sketch. They don't need approval to move forward. She wanted to live like that. Now it was her 21st birthday. $60 no food and hunger was making the decision for her the way it always did. She laced up her boots, the second pair bought at Goodwill for $4 after the first pair was stolen, and stepped outside into the kind of Arizona morning that feels like the inside of an oven someone forgot to turn off. The walk to Coyote Jack's salvage yard took 35 minutes. She'd passed it a dozen times on food runs to the gas station and the dollar store. Acres of dead metal and forgotten things baking in the desert sun. Cars without engines, boats without bottoms, appliances with their doors hanging open like mouths mid-scream. She'd thought about it every single time. Thought about what Nolan had taught her. Thought about the fact that somewhere in all that wreckage, there might be something with wheels that still had a heartbeat. The gate was chained. A dog paced behind it barking without real conviction. The bark of an animal that knew it was supposed to be guarding something but couldn't remember what. "We're closed," a voice called from inside a small office that looked like it had been built from spare parts and stubbornness. "Sign says you open at 8. It's 8:02. A man emerged, 60s, maybe older, with skin that had been tanned and retanned by decades of Arizona sun until it looked like leather that someone had left on a dashboard. 3 fingers missing on his right hand. The remaining ones thick and scarred. Eyes that had seen things and decided not to talk about any of them. A name patch on his work shirt faded almost to nothing. Red Briggs. He looked at her the way mechanics look at cars they're not sure about. Assessing, calculating, looking for something particular that he couldn't name but would recognize when he saw it. "I need transportation," Grace said. "Something cheap, something that runs or could run." Briggs laughed. Not mean, just honest. The laugh of a man who's heard that sentence 100 times and knows what comes after it. "Good luck. Most of what's in here is spare parts and memories. I'll pay 10 to look around. $10 to walk the yard. Look through what you've got." He studied her harder. The worn clothes, the frame that was too thin in places where thin meant not eating, the blonde hair that needed washing, the defiance in her blue eyes that he recognized because he'd seen it before. A long time ago, in someone else. "Keep your 10, he said, unchaining the gate. "Go ahead." She almost argued, almost insisted on paying because she'd learned the hard way that nothing free stays free. Every gift comes with a string. Every kindness comes with a bill that arrives later, always when you can least afford to pay it. But her stomach made the decision. $10 saved meant food tonight. She walked through, 20 minutes of weaving through dead machines. Past car frames rusted into shapes that looked almost deliberate, like sculptures made by an artist who worked in decay. Past boat hulls that would never touch water again. Past refrigerators and washing machines and engine blocks and things she couldn't even identify anymore because time and weather had erased their purpose and left only mass. Then she stopped. It was buried. Not stored, not parked. Buried. Deliberately hidden under boat parts and stripped washing machine drums in a tarp that had mostly rotted away, like someone had wanted this particular machine to disappear from the surface of the earth, to be swallowed by the yard and forgotten by everything and everyone. Grace pulled back the debris piece by piece, methodical, patient, her heart beating faster with each layer she removed because she knew what she was looking at before she could fully see it. The shape told her, the proportions told her. The way the frame curved and the way the forks angled and the width of the tank under the grime, all of it speaking a language she'd learned in a garage in Flagstaff from a quiet man who taught her that machines have voices if you know how to listen. And there it was, a 1971 Harley-Davidson FX Superglide. She knew because Nolan had taught her. Because she'd memorized every Harley frame ever built from magazines and waiting rooms and library books and sketches she'd drawn in the back seats of caseworkers' cars during transfers between homes. The shape was unmistakable, even under decades of neglect. Even under what had to be more than 20 years of Arizona weather, doing what Arizona weather does to anything left unprotected. The tank was the color of dried blood. Chrome that had once been bright enough to throw back the sun was now brown with rust textured layered, like geological strata recording the passage of years. The license plate was bent backward, deliberately folded like someone had wanted to hide the numbers. One mirror shattered, one missing entirely. Tires flat and cracked. cables hanging loose, seat leather split and curled from heat exposure. But the frame. Grace crouched down, ran her hand along the metal where it connected to the engine mount, felt the steel under her fingers solid, straight, unbowed. She checked the neck, the backbone, the rear section, all of it holding true. No cracks, no bends, no fatigue fractures. The bones of this machine were intact, underneath everything the world had done to it, underneath the rust and the neglect and the years of being buried and forgotten. This bike was still here, still whole where it counted, still waiting, just like her. Found something. Briggs appeared beside her. His expression changed when he saw what she was looking at. Something flickered across his face. Surprise first, quick, then something darker. Recognition. Maybe fear. The kind of expression a man makes when a door he thought was sealed shut starts to open. "How long has this been here?" Grace asked. Briggs took a moment before answering. "Longer than me. I bought this place about 16 years ago. The bike was already here. Buried like that. I never touched it." "Does it run?" "Hasn't made a sound the whole time." He paused. His remaining fingers tapped against his thigh, in a rhythm that looked involuntary, like a nervous habit he couldn't control. "Some machines are better left alone." "Kid, why?" He didn't answer that question. His eyes went to her face, her hair, her eyes, then back to the bike, and something passed through his expression that Grace filed away without understanding. "How much?" 75. Her heart dropped through her stomach and kept falling. She pulled out the 320s, held them toward him. "This is everything I have. $60. That's it. That's all of it." Briggs stared at the money in her hand. Stared at her. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wasn't sure he should say. Words that had weight. Words that might change things in ways he wasn't prepared for. "You got people?" he asked quietly. "Someone who knows you're here?" "No. Nobody at all. Just me." Long silence. The kind of silence that stretches and fills with everything that isn't being said. The kind that holds its breath. "Take it," he said finally. He took the $60 slowly, like the bills weighed more than paper should. Like accepting them meant accepting something else, something larger, something he could feel pressing against the edges of a story he thought was over. "But listen to me. Be careful with that bike. It doesn't even run. That's not what I mean." He held her gaze with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "This bike has been here since before I bought the yard. Someone buried it on purpose. And in all the years I've been here, I've never touched it because there are things you learn not to disturb. But you should know, someone might come looking for it, someone who's been looking for a very long time." Grace should have asked what he meant, should have pressed him, should have demanded to know why a salvage yard owner was warning her about a motorcycle that had been sitting untouched for more than 2 decades. But the sun shifted, and for 1 second, just one light hit the chrome beneath the rust, and the bike looked alive. Like it was breathing. Like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. For exactly her. She grabbed the handlebars. "I'll be careful." Briggs watched her go. He stood at the gate as she leaned into the weight of the dead machine and began pushing it toward the road, a girl who weighed maybe 120 pounds, trying to move something that weighed more than 600. He watched until she was a small figure on the shoulder of the road, wavering in the heat shimmer. Then he walked back into his office, sat down heavily in a chair that groaned under him, and picked up a phone he hadn't used in years. He dialed a number from memory. His hands, the ones with 3 fingers missing on the right, were shaking. The kind of shaking that comes not from weakness, but from the weight of what you're about to set in motion. It rang 4 times, yeah. A voice on the other end, low, cautious. The voice of a man who doesn't answer numbers he doesn't recognize, unless something in his gut tells him to. "Flint," Briggs said. "It's me." Silence, the deep kind. The kind that happens when the world tilts on its axis and everything that was level a second ago is suddenly at an angle. Someone just found it. Found what Cole's bike. Some girl. Young blonde, 21. Paid everything she had. $60. Her last $60 on earth, Flint. The silence stretched until it hummed like a wire pulled too tight. We're South Tucson. Trailer park off the frontage road. She's alone, Flint. Real alone. The kind of alone that doesn't end well without someone intervening. Don't let her out of your sight. She already left. Walked out pushing it. pushing a dead Harley down the shoulder in 100-degree heat with no food and no phone and no one waiting for her anywhere in this world. Another silence, longer than the first. Then a sound Briggs hadn't heard from Declan Mercer in 21 years. The sound of a man making a decision he'd been waiting his whole life to make. A sound that lived somewhere between grief and purpose, between the man he'd been and the man he was about to become. I'm calling everyone. Flint, all of them for a bike, not for a bike. Flint's voice cracked on something sharp and buried something that had been lodged in his chest for 2 decades like shrapnel too deep to remove. For whoever cared enough to save it when she had nothing left. And Briggs, yeah, 21 years I've been looking. 21 years of nothing. Every salvage yard between Tucson and Flagstaff. Every chop shop, every back road deal, every lead that went nowhere. Every night I woke up at 3 in the morning because the not knowing was worse than any answer could be. And a 21-year-old girl with $60 found what 99 of us couldn't. The line went dead. Briggs set the phone down, looked out his window toward the road, where Grace Mercer was already a small figure in the distance, pushing a dead motorcycle toward a life she couldn't possibly imagine. A life that was already pushing back toward her with the force of 99 engines and 21 years of unanswered questions. Be careful, kid, he whispered to the empty office. You just woke something up. The distance from Coyote Jack's salvage yard to the trailer park was 2.7 miles. Grace counted every step because counting kept her mind off the heat and the pain and the voice in her head that said this was the stupidest thing she'd ever done. The Harley weighed over 600 pounds. Dead weight, no engine to help, no momentum, nothing but Grace's 120-pound body pushing against physics and gravity and common sense, and the entire accumulated wisdom of the universe that says, when you have $60 and no food, you buy food. Her hands blistered in the first half mile. She could feel the skin separating, could feel fluid filling the spaces where her palms gripped rubber handlebar grips that had been baking in the Arizona sun for longer than she'd been alive. She didn't stop, couldn't stop. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant admitting that she'd just spent her last dollar on something that couldn't feed her or shelter her or keep her alive through another week of invisibility. Cars passed, some honked, curious or cruel. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Both sounded the same when you were on the wrong side of the window. One man slowed down, leaned out his window. Need a ride, sweetheart? The way he said it made her skin crawl. She gave him the look she'd perfected in foster homes. The one that said, I will make this more trouble than you're looking for. He drove off. At mile 1, her legs started shaking. Not trembling, shaking, the kind of muscular failure that comes from no food and too much heat, and asking your body to do something it doesn't have the fuel for, like trying to run an engine on fumes. You can do it for a while. The machine will give you everything it has, but eventually the physics win. Eventually the needle hits empty, and what happens next isn't a negotiation. She sat on the curb, closed her eyes, breathed air that felt like it was coming from the inside of a kiln. Get up, she told herself. Get up or leave it. She couldn't leave it. She knew that with a certainty that bypassed logic, bypassed survival instinct, bypassed every rational voice that was screaming at her to abandon 600 pounds of rust and walk away. Leaving this bike on the roadside would be like leaving herself, like admitting that broken things really were trash, like proving every person who'd ever given up on her right. She stood up, pushed. At mile 2, a pickup truck pulled over ahead of her. An older woman, silver hair pulled back from a face that had been weathered by years and wind, and the kind of life that doesn't leave much room for softness. She didn't get out, didn't speak, didn't offer help or advice, or the kind of pity that costs nothing to give and nothing to receive. She just set a cold water bottle on a fence post by the road and drove away. Grace reached the bottle, condensation still clinging to the plastic, cold enough to make her gasp when it touched her cracked lips. She drank half and cried, just for 30 seconds, just for 30 fredu. Just long enough to remember that somewhere in this burning, indifferent world, kindness still existed in forms that didn't come with strings or clipboards or expiration dates. Then she wiped her face, gripped the handlebars, and pushed the last 7/10 of a mile home. The trailer park greeted her the way it always did, with judgment. Mrs. Dillard from 3 units down watched from her porch rocking chair, still arms crossed, her expression caught between pity and the kind of disapproval that comes from someone who's survived her own hard years and decided that other people's suffering is a personal failing rather than a circumstance. Two teenage boys had their phones out before Grace even cleared the entrance, angling for the shot that would perform best on social media. Yo, this is going straight to TikTok. Homeless girl bought a dead bike. This is crazy. A woman leaned out her doorway, voice carrying the way voices carry when someone wants an audience. When someone wants to make sure the whole park hears what they're about to say. You paid $60 for that, girl. You got smoked. That's what happens when kids think they know everything and don't know nothing. The words hit like punches, each one landing in the place where Grace kept the running tally of every time the world told her she wasn't worth the trouble. Every foster parent who sent her back, every caseworker who lost her file, every school that didn't notice when she disappeared. Every morning she woke up and the first thing she felt was the weight of being no one to anyone. She kept pushing. The bike's tires scraped on every crack in the pavement, metal screaming against asphalt like the machine itself was protesting its own resurrection. The sound echoed off the trailer walls and aluminum siding and announced her failure to anyone who cared to listen. She reached her unit, collapsed on the steps. Let the bike lean against the siding where it settled with a groan that sounded almost human. A settling, an exhale, the sound of something finally stopping after being in motion for a very long time. Both of them had made it, both broken, both still here. She sat there for a long time, catching her breath, letting her heart rate come down from whatever dangerous place it had climbed to, feeling the blisters on her hands pulse in sync with her heartbeat like a second set of wounds measuring time. $60 gone. No food, no plan, nothing ahead of her that looked like anything other than more of what was behind her. But she had the bike, and the bike she would soon discover had a secret that had been waiting 21 years to be found. Evening came slow. The heat retreated 1 degree at a time, like it was reluctant to leave, like it had gotten comfortable in the spaces between trailers and didn't see any reason to go. Grace sat beside the bike with dish soap, a torn t-shirt, and a plastic bucket of water she'd carried from the park's communal spigot 3 trips worth because the bucket leaked. She started cleaning, top to bottom, the way Nolan taught her. Don't rush. Let the machine tell you its story. Every scratch, every dent, every layer of grime, that's a chapter. Your job isn't to erase it. Your job is to read it. She heard his voice in her head as clearly as if he were kneeling beside her. That quiet, patient voice that never raised itself, never rushed, never made her feel like a question was stupid or a mistake, was fatal. The only voice in 20 years that had sounded like it was talking to her instead of about her. Dirt came away in dark streams. Chrome appeared underneath. Not perfect, not shining, but real. Present. Alive under the grime the way bones live under skin. The way a person lives under the version of themselves the world sees. She worked the handlebars, the forks, the tank. Watched the dried blood color deepen into something richer as she cleaned something that had been beautiful once and could be beautiful again if someone had the patience. Then she reached the frame near the engine mount, a spot where the rust was thickest, where 2 decades of Arizona weather had built up a crust that took real effort to remove. She scrubbed harder. The t-shirt caught on something, a groove in the metal. She leaned closer. The evening light was fading, but there was enough left to see by if she angled her head right. 3 letters carved deep into the steel with something sharp. A chisel maybe, or a railroad spike. Done with force, done with intention, done by someone who wanted these letters to survive whatever came next. C.J. Below them smaller, almost eaten by time, but still legible if you knew to look. Ride free or die. Grace traced the letters with her fingertip, felt the depth. This wasn't decoration. This wasn't casual. Someone had branded this bike the way cattlemen brand livestock. Permanently, possessively, with the understanding that this mark would outlast the hand that made it. Her heart was beating in her throat now. She didn't know why. Didn't understand why 3 letters carved into a dead motorcycle's frame were making her hands shake worse than hunger ever had. Making her blood move faster than the heat should allow. Making every nerve in her body fire at once like an engine turning over after years of silence. She pulled out the Polaroid, the man in the photograph. his leather vest, the patches she'd never been able to read because the image was too faded and too small, and she'd never had anyone to ask, but there were letters on that vest, visible if you held the photo at the right angle and the right light. She held the photo next to the frame, tilted both toward the fading evening sun. Her hands went still. The letters on the vest, the letters on the frame. The same as CJM. Grace sat back on the dirt, the photograph in one hand, the other hand still resting on three letters carved by a man she'd never met into a bike she'd bought with her last $60 in a salvage yard she'd walked into on a birthday no one remembered. Coincidence. That's what the logical part of her brain said. Coincidence. Random. Meaningless. The universe doesn't leave clues because the universe doesn't care enough about any single person to bother. But the part of her that had carried this photograph for 21 years against her chest through every group home and every shelter and every cold night and every morning that started with the word still, that part said something different. That part said you were always supposed to find this. She needed internet, didn't have a phone. But the laundromat 2 blocks east had Wi-Fi if you stood close enough to the building and held the tablet at the right angle and didn't breathe too hard because the connection was so fragile that even body heat seemed to disrupt it. She walked fast, almost running. The Polaroid in her pocket, the letters burned into her memory. CJM. The Wi-Fi was weak. She crouched against the building's cinder block wall using a library tablet she'd borrowed and never returned her one criminal act, the only law she'd ever broken, unless you counted trespassing in an abandoned trailer as a crime worth prosecuting. The screen glowed in the darkness like a window into a world she didn't belong to, but was about to enter. She searched. CJM Harley Davidson, 2004, missing Arizona. The results loaded in fragments. Forum posts about missing riders. Cold case discussions on biker websites where men with screen names like Road Dog and Iron Mike debated the fates of people who'd vanished from highways and back roads. Then one hit that made everything stop, that made her lungs forget how to work and her vision narrow to a tunnel with a single point of light at the end. Hellsangels. Legend vanishes. Arizona. Chapter mourns. James Mercer, beloved rider and brother, last seen March 28, 2004, riding south on Interstate 17 during a severe sandstorm with his wife Allison Mercer. Neither was seen again. The motorcycle was never recovered. James Mercer. CJ me. Mercer. Grace stared at the screen until her eyes burned. Mercer, her last name. The name on the birth certificate found with her at the hospital. The name she'd carried for 21 years without knowing where it came from or what it meant or why someone had chosen it for a baby abandoned in a hospital with nothing but a photograph and a gas station blanket. The article tried to load further. More text below the fold, more details, more pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. The Wi-Fi died. The screen went black. She stood in the laundromat parking lot, hands shaking, mind racing. The sun had set completely now, and the sky was that deep Arizona purple that comes right before the stars appear, the color of bruises healing the color of things ending and beginning at the same time. Mercer. His name was Mercer. Her name was Mercer. A man named James Mercer carved his initials into a motorcycle and then disappeared into a sandstorm with a woman whose face Grace didn't know, but whose eyes Grace saw every morning in her own reflection. And 21 years later, a girl named Mercer walked into a salvage yard with $60 and found it. The logical part of her brain was still talking, still insisting on coincidence and probability and the mathematical likelihood of shared surnames in a state with millions of people. But that voice was getting quieter with every heartbeat, getting drowned out by something louder, something that came from the same place as the certainty she'd felt when she first touched the frame, the same place as the pull that made her spend her last money on something dead when she needed food to live. 11 miles away in a room that smelled like leather and decades of road dust, a man named Flint was staring at a photograph on his phone. A photo Briggs had taken and sent. 3 letters freshly cleaned on a rusted frame. Letters Flint had been searching for since 2004. His hands were shaking too. And in the morning, 99 engines would fire at once. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay on her sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, turning the name over and over in her mind like a stone she couldn't stop touching. James Mercer. Allison Mercer. Missing. 2004. Her birth year. Her surname. A bike with initials that matched a photograph she'd carried against her heart since before she could form memories. She held the Polaroid against her chest and tried to make her brain work the way it was supposed to. Logically, carefully, the way you solve a problem when the problem is the only thing standing between you and an answer you've been waiting your entire life to hear. But logic had nothing to do with what was happening inside her. Something deeper was pulling. Something that lived in the part of her that had always known the photograph meant more than just a picture, more than just a clue. It was a thread, and she just grabbed it. By 4 in the morning, she gave up pretending, got up, walked outside, sat next to the bike in the dark, and put her hand on the frame where the letters were carved. The metal was cool now, the desert night having pulled the heat out of it the way desert nights do, transforming everything from furnace to freezer in the space of a few hours. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Who the hell are you?" The bike didn't answer, but 11 miles away, a man who hadn't slept either was about to answer for it. Flint sat in the Hells Angels clubhouse at a table covered in photographs, maps, police reports, newspaper clippings. 21 years of searching laid out like evidence in a trial that never ended. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since Briggs's call. The kind of shaking that doesn't come from cold or age or weakness, but from the sudden violent disruption of a grief that has settled so deep into a man's body that removing it feels like surgery without anesthesia. Ridge sat across from him, reading the old files, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound small next to what was happening. "Cole's bike," Flint said, for the 4th time, like saying it would make it real, like repetition could bridge the gap between 21 years of nothing and this. "Could be a different bike," Ridge said. He didn't believe it. His voice gave that away. But someone had to say it because hope is a dangerous thing in rooms where men have learned not to trust it. Flint slid his phone across the table. The photo from Briggs. 3 letters carved deep into steel. CJM. That's Cole's carving. I watched him do it. Summer of '03. He used a railroad spike. Took him 2 hours. Said he wanted something on that bike that would outlast everything. That would still be there when the chrome was gone and the paint was gone and the engine was dust. Ridge stared at the photo, the light from the overhead lamp turning his face into a landscape of shadow and something that looked dangerously close to emotion. It outlasted him. Yeah, Flint's voice broke on the word. Just barely. Just enough for Ridge to notice and pretend he didn't. It did. "So what's the play?" "We go get it, buy it back from the girl." Flint shook his head. "Briggs says she's alone, no family, no phone, living in a condemned unit in some trailer park on the south side. Spent her last dollar on that bike. Not a dollar she could spare. Her last dollar, everything she had in this world. Why would she do that? Why does anyone buy something broken when they've got nothing?" Flint looked at the photographs on the table, his brother's face staring up from a dozen different moments, laughing, riding alive, because they see themselves in it. Ridge waited. He'd known Flint for 22 years, knew when to push and when to let silence do the work. This was a silence moment, the kind where words would only get in the way of whatever was forming in the space between 2 men who'd shared enough road to know each other's hearts without having to ask. "Her name is Mercer," Flint said. Ridge's head came up fast. "What?" "The girl. Briggs caught her name when she paid. Grace Mercer." The clubhouse went dead quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. "Flint." Ridge said it slowly, carefully, the way you say something when you know the words are going to land like matches on dry wood. "Cole's wife was pregnant when they disappeared." "I know. If the baby survived, if Allison got far enough before whatever happened on that road, if someone found that child and brought her to a hospital." "I know. That girl could be." "I said I know." Flint pressed both palms flat on the table. The photographs of his brother stared up at him. Cole at 25, laughing on a ride through Sedona. Cole at 30, arm around Allison, both of them so alive it hurt to look at. Cole at 32, the last photograph taken before they vanished, standing next to the Superglide, hand on the tank, looking at the camera with an expression Flint had never been able to decode until this moment. It was the expression of a man saying goodbye to someone who didn't know it yet. "We ride at dawn," Flint said. "Every single one of us. All 99. For a bike," Ridge asked. Knowing the answer, asking anyway. Flint stood, His chair scraped back hard against the floor. Not for the bike. His voice cracked on something sharp and buried something that 21 years of searching had compressed into a diamond of grief and hope so tightly fused he couldn't tell them apart anymore. For the girl who saved it when she had nothing left. And maybe. He stopped. Steadied himself. Maybe for a niece I didn't know I had. Ridge pulled out his phone, started making calls. By midnight, the word had spread through every member of the Arizona chapter. By 2 in the morning, men who hadn't ridden together in years were pulling Harleys out of garages, checking oil, tightening chains, replacing bulbs, making sure their machines were ready. Nobody asked why. Nobody needed to. When Flint called a full ride, you didn't ask. You showed up. Because showing up was the whole point. It was the oath and the promise and the reason 99 men called each other brother. You show up, especially when you don't know what you're showing up for. Especially then. Meanwhile, Grace was losing the last argument she had with herself. She'd gone back to the laundromat at 5 in the morning, hoping the Wi-Fi would hold long enough to finish reading the article. It didn't. 3 more sentences loaded before the connection died again. But those 3 sentences were enough. Cole James Mercer, age 32, Hellsangels, Arizona. Chapter, last seen March 28, 2004, riding south on Interstate 17 during a severe sandstorm. His wife, Allison Mercer, 21, was with him. Neither was seen again. Allison Mercer. Grace pulled out the Polaroid. The blonde woman. Ice blue eyes. The same eyes Grace saw every time she looked in a mirror. Her hands were shaking so hard the photograph blurred. She pressed it flat against her knee and stared at the woman's face. Tried to see past the fading, past the damage, past 21 years of wear. Tried to see something she could recognize in the shape of a cheek or the angle of a bob or the way the woman held herself straight and defiant, like someone who refused to be small, even when the world was pressing down with everything it had. "Are you my mother?" Grace said to the photograph. Her voice cracked on the last word in a way it hadn't cracked since she was 14 and stopped crying because crying never fixed anything and never changed anything and never brought anyone back. She walked back to the trailer, sat down next to the bike, and waited for something she couldn't name. It found her at 7:14 in the morning. Mrs. Dillard came outside earlier than usual. Grace noticed because Mrs. Dillard never came outside before 9. She was a creature of routine, of habit, of the precise scheduling that comes from a life built on the principle that unpredictability is the enemy, and the only defense against it is doing the same thing at the same time every single day. But here she was at 7:14, standing on her porch, looking at Grace with an expression Grace had never seen on her face before. Not judgment, not pity, something closer to worry. "Hey," Grace called. "You okay? You be careful today, girl." Mrs. Dillard's voice was different, lower, the authority stripped out of it and replaced with something fragile. "What? Why just stay close to your place? Don't go nowhere. Why, what's going on?" Mrs. Dillard shook her head and went inside. The door closed with a sound that felt like a period at the end of a sentence Grace couldn't read. Then she felt it, a vibration, not in the air, in the ground, coming up through the concrete steps she was sitting on, through her bones into her chest. So faint at first she thought she was imagining it. Her empty stomach playing tricks. Dehydration making her feel things that weren't there, the way mirages make you see water on highways that are bone dry. But then her water bottle started rattling against the step. A tiny sound, a tiny movement. Real. Dogs started barking. Not one dog. Every dog in the trailer park. All at once, the synchronized panic of animals sensing something their owners couldn't. Birds launched off the power lines in a single burst, like someone had fired a starting gun only they could hear. And the sound grew. Low, deep, like thunder that refused to stop. Like the ground itself was growling, getting louder with every second, every heartbeat, every breath Grace took as she stood up slowly and turned toward the entrance of the trailer park. Shapes in the heat shimmer, 1 at first, then 5, then 10, then more than she could count. Chrome catching the early sun and throwing it back in blinding flashes that made her raise her hand to shield her eyes. Dark silhouettes becoming solid, becoming real, becoming an army of leather and steel rolling toward her in a formation so tight and so deliberate it looked choreographed by something older than planning. Grace's legs went weak. She grabbed the bike's handlebar to stay upright. Oh God. She looked at the letters carved into the frame. CJM. Then back at the road, at the wall of motorcycles getting closer and louder and bigger with every second. They're coming for it, she breathed. They found out. They're coming to take it. Her survival brain kicked in hard. The one she'd built over 21 years of threat assessment of reading rooms before entering them, of knowing when to run before the hitting started. Hide, run, disappear, the field behind the trailer park. She could make it, leave the bike, be gone before they reached her. She'd done it before, she could do it again. She was good at vanishing. She'd been trained by the best teachers in the world, the ones who taught by leaving, by forgetting, by proving over and over that the safest place to be was gone. But her feet wouldn't move, because leaving the bike meant leaving the last $60 she had in this world, leaving the one thing that had her name carved into its bones, leaving the only thread that connected her to a blonde woman with ice blue eyes and a man who might have been. 99 motorcycles rolled into the trailer park. The formation was precise, almost military. They spread into a wide semicircle around Grace's trailer, each bike stopping in sequence, each engine cutting off one by one in a cascade of silence that moved through the formation like a wave until the quiet that replaced them was louder than anything Grace had ever heard. Louder than the engines, louder than the voices that had mocked her yesterday, louder than 21 years of no one coming. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand there with her hand on a dead Harley and her heart trying to break through her ribs. Doors opened across the trailer park. People emerged onto porches with the slow caution of civilians watching something they didn't understand. Mrs. Dillard crossed herself, lips moving in prayer. The teenage boys had their phones up, but their hands were visibly trembling. The park manager was on his phone, words tumbling out too fast to form sentences. One man dismounted. He removed his helmet slowly. Silver blonde hair caught the morning light. His face was a map of years, not just age but weight. The kind of weight that comes from carrying something too long without being able to set it down. The kind that reshapes a man's features the way water reshapes stone, not by force but by persistence, by never stopping, by being there every single morning when he opens his eyes. His eyes were gray, not soft gray, storm gray. The kind of gray that happens when someone has looked at too many horizons searching for something that never appeared. He didn't look at Grace first. He looked at the bike, and his face broke. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see something crack behind those storm gray eyes. 21 years of searching, of hoping, of waking up at 3 in the morning and walking outside because the not knowing was suffocating him, and the only thing worse than no answer was the possibility that the answer was something he couldn't survive hearing. All of it hitting at once like a fist made of time. He took a breath, steadied himself, walked forward, his boots on gravel the only sound in the world, every step deliberate, every step closing a distance that had taken 21 years to cross. He stopped 10 feet from Grace. Where did you get this low voice? Controlled. But she could hear the fractures in it, the places where the control was thinnest, where the real thing underneath was pressing through. I bought it. Grace's voice shook, but she didn't step back. Yesterday, at the salvage yard. It's mine. I have a receipt. I'm not here to take it from you. Then why are you here? Why are 99 of you here? Because this bike belonged to my brother. His voice caught. He let it catch. Didn't try to smooth it over or hide it, or pretend he was anything other than a man standing in front of the last piece of someone he'd loved and lost. And I've been looking for it for 21 years. Grace's grip tightened on the handlebar until her blistered palms screamed. Your brother, Cole James Mercer, CJM. He pointed to the frame without taking his eyes off her face. He carved those letters himself. I watched him do it. Sat right next to him while he worked a railroad spike into that steel for 2 hours. Mercer, Grace repeated. The word felt different now, heavier, loaded with something that made the air between them thick enough to touch, yeah. He studied her face in a way that made her feel like he was reading something written on her bones. Something she couldn't see, but he could. Something that was confirming or destroying every hope he'd carried for 21 years. I'm Declan Mercer. People call me Flint. What's your name? She almost didn't answer. Every instinct said, don't. Don't give your name to strangers. Don't give them anything they can use. Don't trust. Don't hope. Don't open a door you can't close. Grace Mercer. Flint's entire body went still. Not frozen. Still. The difference between a man who stopped moving and a man who couldn't move. His lips parted. Closed. Parted again. Behind him, Ridge took a step forward, then stopped. Mercer Flint whispered, "It's the name on my birth certificate. The one they found with me at the hospital when I was 3 days old. When I was abandoned." Flint looked like a man watching a door open that he'd been standing in front of for 21 years. A door he'd knocked on and pushed against and beaten with his fists and pressed his ear to listening for any sound from the other side. His eyes dropped to her hair, blonde, like Allison's, moved to her eyes, ice blue, like Allison's, moved to the way she held her jaw, tight, defiant, the way Cole held his when he was scared and refusing to show it. When the world was closing in and the only defense left was the refusal to let anyone see it happening. "How old are you?" His voice was barely there, a whisper wearing the clothes of speech. 21. Yesterday was my birthday. When? What's the date? April 2nd. Flint turned to Ridge. Something passed between them that didn't need words. Ridge's face went white, the color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug. "Flint." Ridge said it like a warning and a prayer at the same time. Cole and Allison disappeared March 28th, 2004. 5 days, Ridge said. 5 days before April 2nd. I can count. Flint's voice was rough. Sandpaper dragged across raw wood. What Grace looked between them, searching their faces for something that would make this make sense. What does that mean? 5 days before what Flint took another step toward her, close enough now that she could see his hands were trembling. This man, this massive leather-clad, silver-haired man who'd ridden in at the head of 99 motorcycles like he commanded the horizon itself, was trembling. Cole's wife, he said carefully, each word placed like a foot on thin ice. Allison. She was 9 months pregnant when they disappeared. Everything went quiet inside Grace's head. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that happens right before the world rearranges itself. The kind that happens when every answer you've ever searched for suddenly stands up in front of you and you realize you're not ready. You thought you were. You spent 21 years getting ready, but you're not, because nothing prepares you for the moment the empty space inside you finally gets a name. "What did she look like?" Grace asked. Her voice came from somewhere far away, somewhere she couldn't reach. Blonde, blue eyes, about your height, stubborn as hell, wouldn't back down from anyone or anything. Flint's eyes were wet, storm gray and wet. She looked like you, Grace. She looked exactly like you. Grace's knees buckled. She didn't fall because Flint caught her arm. Fast, instinctive. The grip of someone who spent a lifetime catching things before they hit the ground. Who'd trained himself to reach without thinking because thinking takes too long when someone you care about is falling. "Easy, breathe. I can't. I don't." She was gasping, not crying. Something bigger than crying, something that didn't have a name. 21 years of not knowing, of carrying a faded photograph against her chest like a talisman, of lying awake in 11 different bedrooms, wondering why she was thrown away like something that didn't matter. All of it rushing up at once, like a wave she'd been standing in front of her whole life and had finally hit. Ridge brought water. She drank without tasting it. 99 men stood in the morning sun watching, waiting, holding a space for whatever was happening with the reverence of people witnessing something they didn't fully understand but knew was sacred. Mrs. Dillard was crying silently on her porch. The teenage boys had lowered their phones. Even the dogs had gone quiet. Like the whole world understood that something was happening that demanded a silence bigger than any sound could fill. Flint stood close, steady. His presence like a wall between Grace and everything that had ever hurt her. Between Grace and every empty room and every unanswered question and every morning that started with the word still. She looked up at him. This stranger who might not be a stranger. This man whose blood might be her blood. Whose brother's initials were carved into a bike she'd bought with $60 she couldn't afford to spend. And for the first time in 21 years, Grace Mercer didn't feel invisible. Flint's men moved the way men move when care has been given a mission and a direction. Within minutes of Grace saying she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, food appeared from saddlebags and vest pockets and the hidden compartments that bikers build into their machines for long rides. Sandwiches wrapped in foil, protein bars, thermoses of black coffee, bottles of water. A man named Torque, real name Cade, with wide shoulders and hands that looked like they'd been built for demolition, but moved with the precision of a watchmaker, brought her a breakfast burrito, wrapped in foil that was still warm enough to steam when she peeled back the edge. "Eat slow," he said. "Trust me on that. Your stomach's been empty long enough that it forgot how to work. Give it time to remember." She took one bite and her eyes filled with tears. She ate anyway, cried anyway. Both at the same time sitting on the steps of a condemned trailer in a park on the south edge of Tucson, surrounded by 99 men in leather vests who were treating her like she mattered, like she was worth stopping for, like her hunger was something that offended them on a level deeper than politeness, on a level where letting someone starve when you have food in your hands isn't just neglect. It's a crime against the basic contract of being human. Nobody stared. Nobody made it a moment. They just kept handing her things. Water, more food, a clean bandana for her blistered hands that someone had soaked with cool water from a bottle. The kind of practical, unperformative care that comes from men who've learned that helping doesn't require speeches. It requires doing, and then shutting up about it. Flint sat beside her on the steps, close enough that she could feel him breathing, close enough that his presence felt like a wall between her and everything that had ever hurt her. Not a wall that caged her in, a wall that kept the worst of the world out, the kind of wall she'd never had and had stopped believing existed. She ate until the shaking in her hands stopped, until the blur at the edges of her thoughts cleared, until her body remembered what it felt like to have fuel, to have something in the tank other than fear and stubbornness and the raw animal determination to keep existing even when existing felt like punishment. When she finally set down the last bite of the second burrito, she looked at the bike, her father's bike. The word still felt foreign in her mind, father. She'd never used that word for anyone before, never had reason to, never had a face to attach it to. Now she had a face in a Polaroid and 3 letters carved into steel, and a man sitting beside her who shared her blood and hadn't known she existed until 12 hours ago. "The bike has a secret," she said. Flint looked at her. "When I was cleaning the seat last night before I found the letters, I felt something underneath. The seat sits wrong. It's not just bolted down. Something's under there. Something that doesn't belong to the frame." Flint turned to Torque. Torque was already moving. He'd heard. He had the tools in his hands before anyone asked, because that's the kind of mechanic he was. The kind who's already solving the problem for the problem finishes announcing itself. The seat came off with effort. 21 years of rust had welded the bolts into their housing. Torque worked them free with a patience that contradicted his size each movement, careful, deliberate, the movements of a man who understood that what was underneath this seat might be more fragile than metal. "Hold on," Torque said. He tilted the frame, ran his fingers along the inside cavity where the seat had been bolted. The space between the frame rails that most people never see because most people never have reason to look. Then he stopped. His fingers went still. "There's something taped in here. Deep. Whoever put this in didn't want it found by accident." Grace's heart slammed against her ribs hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Torque peeled back layers of duct tape, old gray, brittle with age, but still holding. Still doing its job after 21 years, because whoever had placed this here had used enough tape to survive a decade and then doubled it. He pulled out a waterproof pouch, the size of a paperback book, sealed tight, heavy enough that it sat in his palm with a weight that had nothing to do with its physical mass. He handed it to Flint. Flint held it for a long moment. Just held it. The way you hold something when you know that opening it will divide your life into before and after. When you know that whatever's inside will answer questions you've been asking for 21 years. And that the answers might be worse than the silence they replace. "Open it," Grace said softly. "Please." Flint looked at her. Something passed between them that didn't need words. Something older than language. Permission. Trust. The acknowledgement that this moment belonged to both of them and neither could go through it alone. He unzipped the pouch. Inside, A letter in a sealed plastic bag, a folded document, and a small brass key attached to a tag with numbers written in black marker that had faded but remained legible. 209. Flint pulled out the letter first. His brother's handwriting on the envelope. One word. Flint. That's Cole's writing. Ridge confirmed from behind them. His voice tight. Controlled. The voice of a man who's holding himself together by force of will and the understanding that falling apart right now would not serve anyone. I'd know it anywhere. Flint's fingers fumbled with the plastic bag. Grace had never seen a man's hand shake this badly while the rest of him stayed completely still. The contradiction was almost violent. His body was a statue. His hands were an earthquake. Two different men living in the same frame, one who commanded 99 riders and one who was holding his dead brother's last words and couldn't make his fingers work. He pulled the letter free, unfolded it. Yellowed paper. Blue ink. The handwriting of a man who knew he was running out of time and was writing faster than his hand wanted to because every second counted and some of them were already gone. Read it out loud, Grace said, please. I need to hear it. Flint cleared his throat. It didn't help. His voice came out broken from the first word and stayed broken through every word that followed, and not a single man among the 99 standing in that trailer park thought less of him for it. Because some things are supposed to break your voice. Some things demand it. Flint, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I'm either dead or I had to disappear so fast I couldn't warn you. He stopped, swallowed. The Arizona sun pressed down on all of them like a hand on a wound. Allison's pregnant. We're having a baby girl. Grace made a sound, small, involuntary. The sound a person makes when the last wall between them and the truth comes down and everything they've been holding back floods in at once. Flint kept reading. We were going to tell you next month. Had it all planned. Dinner at the clubhouse, the whole chapter there. Allison wanted to do the announcement herself because you know how she is. How she was. His voice caught on the tense change. Past tense. The cruelest grammar in the English language. But things got complicated. The copperheads know about the federal route. They want us to run product through the southern corridor. I refused. Told them no. Told them to go to hell. Told them the chapter doesn't move poison and never will. A ripple went through the men standing behind them. The name Copperheads landing in the morning air like a match striking. They threatened Allison. Said they'd make her disappear if I talked to the feds or anyone else. Said they'd make it look like she left on her own. They know where she works. They know what car she drives. They know where she gets groceries. Grace pressed her fist against her mouth, held herself together by force, by the same stubbornness that had pushed 600 pounds of dead metal through 100-degree heat. The same stubbornness her father had put on paper 21 years ago. We're leaving tonight. Leaving. New identities. New city. I'm hiding the bike because it's the one thing they'll track. If they find the bike, they find us. Flint's hand trembled. The letter shook. The blue ink blurred and steadied and blurred again. The key in this pouch opens a storage unit in Phoenix. Unit 209. Everything you need to know is there. Everything I couldn't say out loud. Everything that matters. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean absence of sound, but presence of something too large for sound to contain. If our daughter ever finds this bike, Flint stopped. Read the next words silently first, then aloud. Tell her something for me. Tell her that her mother and I loved her before we ever met her. We named her before we knew her face. We ran so she could have a life without looking over her shoulder. We're sorry we couldn't stay. A sound went through the crowd, low, collective. The sound of 99 men absorbing a dead brother's words through their chests instead of their ears. The sound of grief finding new hosts after 21 years in a sealed pouch. Flint, take care of her if she needs it. You're the best man I know. You were always the better brother. Your brother Cole. Flint stopped reading. The letter hung in his hand like something that weighed more than the earth. P.S. The birth certificate is Allison's. Our daughter has her eyes. Grace was crying, not the way she usually cried, quick, private, functional. The mechanical release of pressure that she'd perfected over 2 decades of training herself to feel things only in doses she could survive. This was different. This came from somewhere she didn't have a name for, Somewhere below survival, below defense, below every wall she'd ever built to keep the world from reaching the soft parts of her. This came from the 21-year-old place inside her that had never stopped asking why. Why did they leave me? Why didn't they want me? Why wasn't I enough? And now she had the answer. And the answer was worse than the question, because the answer was they wanted you so badly they died trying to keep you safe. They ran for me, she whispered. Yeah, Flint said. His face was wet. He didn't wipe it, didn't try to. Let the tears fall in front of 99 men, because some moments are bigger than pride, and this was the biggest moment he'd lived through since the day he was told his brother was gone. Ridge picked up the folded document from the pouch, opened it carefully. A birth certificate. He read it silently, then looked at Grace with an expression that closed the last remaining gap between possibility and certainty. Allison Marie Mercer, born 1983, El Paso, married to Cole James Mercer, 2003. This is your mother's birth certificate, Grace. Grace took it from him, held it in both hands. The paper was thin and official and stamped with seals that meant nothing to anyone except the girl holding it, for whom it meant everything. Proof that the woman in the Polaroid had a name, had a life, had existed somewhere outside a faded photograph and a daughter's imagination. The storage unit, Grace said. Phoenix, we go now. Grace Flint started. Don't tell me to rest. Don't tell me to eat more. Don't tell me to process this or give myself time or be careful with my emotions. I've had 21 years of time. 21 years of not knowing why I was left in a hospital like something that didn't matter. She stood up. The tears were still on her face, but her voice had changed, had found something under the grief, something made of iron and inheritance. I need answers. I need them now. Flint studied her, saw Cole in the set of her jaw, saw Allison in the fire behind her eyes, saw himself in the stubbornness that refused to stop pushing when every rational voice said rest. We ride in 30 minutes, he told his men. Nobody argued. They moved. Bikes checked. Gas levels confirmed. Formation planned. The efficiency of men who operated as a single organism when it mattered, who'd spent years learning that speed without coordination is chaos, and coordination without speed is ceremony, and neither one accomplishes anything on its own. Torque approached Grace with something in his hands. Leather gloves, worn soft from years of use. For the ride. Can't have you tearing up those hands any worse. I don't have a helmet. A man she hadn't met yet walked over carrying one. Older 60s white beard that reached his chest, eyes that crinkled in a way that made his whole face change shape. Name's Stitch, he said. Old-timer. Been with this chapter 31 years. Before your dad joined up. Before Flint took the gavel. I've been here since the beginning. Grace put on the helmet. It fit like it had been waiting for her head specifically, like it had been made for this moment and stored until the moment arrived. They rode. 99 motorcycles plus one ghost of a Harley that would stay behind in the trailer park, too broken to run, but too important to leave unguarded. Flint left 4 men behind with it, not because the bike needed protection, because what it represented did. Grace rode on the back of Flint's Harley, holding on to her uncle. The engine rumbled through her body in a way she felt in her teeth, in her spine, in the spaces between her ribs where her heartbeat lived. Wind hitting her arms, the road vibrating up through the frame into her bones. And for the first time in her life, Grace Mercer was moving towards something instead of running from it. Ridge pulled alongside them at a gas stop 90 miles in. His face had the expression of a man who needed to say something but wasn't sure this was the time. Flint. We need to talk about the Copperheads. I know. If they're the reason Cole disappeared, if they did something to him and Allison on that road. I know, Ridge. There are guys in that crew still alive, still operating out of Nevada and New Mexico. If they find out we found the bike, if word gets back to them that Cole's daughter exists. Flint's grip on the handlebars tightened. They won't find out. Briggs knows. Briggs lost 3 fingers because he wouldn't talk about something the Copperheads wanted to know about 15 years ago. He's not going to start running his mouth now. Ridge wasn't satisfied. His jaw said so, even if his words didn't. But he dropped it. Some conversations need a different time and a different place. This was neither. Grace overheard. She waited until Ridge pulled ahead, then leaned close to Flint's ear. The wind carried her words to him and nobody else. Who are the Copperheads? Flint took a long time to answer. Long enough that the highway markers changed from 2 digits to 3. Long enough that the landscape shifted from saguaro cactus to open scrub land. Rival Club, he said finally. Controlled drug routes through southern Arizona in the early 2000s. They wanted our territory, our roads, our connections, our name attached to their product, so the feds would look at us instead of them. Cole was the one who stood against them, refused to let them use the chapter, refused to bend, and they threatened him, threatened Allison, threatened everyone he loved. That's why he ran. That's why he ran. Grace was quiet for a mile. Then she said something that made Flint's blood move differently. And you think they did more than threaten? Flint's silence was its own answer, the kind of silence that fills with everything a man can't say while riding 80 miles an hour toward the place his dead brother left his secrets. They reached Phoenix at 1 in the afternoon. The storage facility sat on a commercial strip that looked like every other commercial strip in every other American city that had been built for function and forgotten by everyone who didn't need something stored. Rows of identical orange units behind chain-link fence. Everything locked. Everything closed. The aesthetic of secrets kept in plain sight. A security guard in a small office watched them approach with the wide eyes of a man who'd spent his career making sure nobody stole lawnmowers and was now staring at 99 Harley Davidsons materializing in his parking lot like a mirage that refused to dissolve. Flint showed the key. Unit 209. The guard typed something into an old computer. His eyebrows went up. That unit's been paid up continuously for 21 years. Automatic renewal. Never missed a payment. Who's paying? Grace asked. Accounts listed under a business name. He read the screen. Hellsangels Arizona chapter. Auto pay from a checking account that's been active since 2003. Flint turned to Ridge. I never set that up. Neither did I. Only officers have access to chapter finances. Ridge paused. Cole was treasurer before he disappeared. The realization hit Flint like a physical blow. The kind that doesn't knock you down but rearranges the architecture of your understanding. He set up automatic payments before he left, Flint said slowly. Used the club account. Knew I'd keep the chapter running. Knew the account would stay open. Knew the payments would keep going whether anyone knew about them or not. He planned all of it, Grace said. The bike, the letter, the storage unit, the payments. He left a trail he knew someone would eventually follow. She paused. He left it for me. Flint looked at her. 21 years of searching. 21 years of tearing apart every salvage yard in Arizona. 21 years of following leads that went nowhere and knocking on doors that never opened. And his brother had been ahead of him the whole time. Had planned for this. Had trusted that the chain wouldn't break. And it took 21 years and a girl with $60 to finish what he started, Flint said quietly. Unit 209. Flint put the key in the lock. Turned it. The mechanism clicked. Loud metallic final. The sound of a door opening that had been closed for longer than Grace had been alive. The roll-up door screeched as it rose. Metal protesting motion after 2 decades of stillness. Grace's lungs stopped working. Inside the unit, perfectly organized, untouched since the night Cole and Allison sealed it shut, boxes labeled in neat handwriting. Allison's handwriting. The handwriting of a woman who was 21 and pregnant and terrified and still organized enough to label boxes because that's who she was. Because even in the middle of running for her life, she maintained the belief that order mattered, that naming things gave them weight, that the future was worth preparing for even when the present was trying to erase it. A crib still in its packaging, never assembled, never used. The picture on the box showing a smiling baby in a room full of sunlight, the kind of room Grace had never slept in. Baby clothes folded and stacked in clear bins. Pink, white, yellow. Tiny shoes no bigger than Grace's palm. Tiny hats meant for a head that had never worn them. A stuffed rabbit, still in its store bag price tag, still attached, purchased by a woman who would never get to see her daughter hold it. They were ready for me, Grace whispered. They bought all of this. They were getting ready. Flint couldn't respond. He was staring at a suitcase. Allison's by the luggage tag. Sitting on the floor like she'd set it down 21 years ago and would be right back. Any minute now. just stepped out for something, just around the corner, just coming. But in the back of the unit, behind the boxes, behind the life that never got lived, a safe, old combination lock, bolted to the concrete floor. That's Cole's safe, Flint said, voice like gravel. Had it since he was 20. Kept everything important in it. What's the combination? Flint tried. Cole's birthday? Nothing. Tried Allison's birthday? Nothing. Tried the chapter's founding date? Nothing. 3 failures, each one a small death, each one a door that refused to open. Try mine, Grace said. Flint looked at her, entered the numbers, 04, 02, 04, April 2nd, 2004. The lock clicked open. Everyone heard it. The whole unit went silent. 99 men crowded behind them, some standing on toolboxes to see over shoulders, all of them holding their breath because the sound of that lock opening was the sound of 21 years ending. Flint opened the safe door, a video camera. Small early 2000s model, the kind that used miniature DV tapes, sitting upright like someone had placed it with the care you'd give a sacred object. A hospital bracelet, tiny infant size. The text faded but readable. Baby girl Mercer, April 2nd, 2004, 6 pounds, 3 ounces. Grace picked up the bracelet, held it in both hands like it was made of something that would dissolve if she gripped too hard. This was mine. This was on my wrist. This was the first thing anyone ever put on me that said I belonged to someone. An envelope marked in Allison's handwriting, for our daughter. And at the bottom of the safe, folded twice, a newspaper clipping. Flint picked it up. His hands had gone completely still now. The stillness of a man bracing for impact. A man who can see what's coming and knows that flinching won't stop it. He unfolded it. Read the headline. And every shred of hope he'd been holding for 21 years about his brother walking through a door someday died in his throat. What does it say? Grace's voice was steel, thin steel. The kind that bends before it breaks and makes a sound when it bends that you never forget. Flint read it. 2 found dead after Desert Storm. Crash, March 30th, 2004. Cole Mercer, 34, and Allison Mercer, 21, both of Phoenix. Single vehicle motorcycle accident near Interstate 17 during severe weather conditions. No foul play suspected. March 30th. Ridge repeated. His voice had gone cold. The temperature around him dropping 10 degrees. 3 days before Grace was born. That's not possible, Grace said. If they both died March 30th, who gave birth to me on April 2nd, Flint reread the clipping. His finger stopped on a line near the bottom. Allison was transported to Banner Medical Center. It says she was transported alive. She was alive when the ambulance reached the hospital. The words hung in the storage unit like something suspended in amber. She held on, Torque said from behind them. His voice rough. 3 days. She held on for 3 days. Long enough to deliver, Ridge finished. Grace sat down on the concrete floor, not because she chose to, because her legs simply refused to hold her anymore. The hospital bracelet still in her hands, her mother's last act on this earth wrapped around her fingers. She was dying, Grace said, and she held on for 3 days to give birth to me. Nobody answered, nobody could. Some truths are too large for human voices to carry. They have to sit in the air on their own and be felt rather than spoken. And my father, Grace looked at Flint. The article says both found dead. Flint checked again. Cole Mercer pronounced dead at the scene. He paused. But the hospital bracelet. Somebody had to bring you to the hospital. Somebody had to put this bracelet on you. Somebody had to be alive long enough to make sure you were safe. The video camera, Grace said. Turn it on. Flint picked up the camera. 21 years old. Battery indicator showing 1 bar. A red sliver of power that had no business still existing. He pressed power. The tiny screen flickered blue, then lit up. There's a tape, he said. 2 recordings. First one dated April 2nd, 2004. That's my birthday, Grace whispered. He was alive. Flint said the words like they were being extracted from his body by force. Cole was alive on April 2nd. The article said he died at the scene on March 30th, but he recorded something 3 days later. The article was wrong, Ridge said. Or someone lied. Flint hit play. The tiny screen showed a hospital room. Fluorescent light, machines beeping in rhythms that sounded like a countdown. Allison lay in a bed barely conscious. face bruised along one limb, skin so pale it looked translucent, like the life was already leaving her in layers, pulling back from the surface the way tide pulls back from shore. But her arms were wrapped around a bundle, a baby, newborn, pink blanket. Grace couldn't breathe, couldn't blink, couldn't look away from the 2-inch screen showing her mother's face for the first time in motion. Not a photograph, not a frozen moment, a living, breathing, dying woman holding her daughter. Cole's voice came from off camera, broken, shaking, the voice of a man watching everything he loved slip through his fingers like water. Allison, baby, stay with me, please stay. Allison's eyes open, blue, ice blue. Grace's eyes, the same shade, the same shape, the same stubborn light that refused to dim, even when everything around it was going dark. Is she okay? Allison whispered. Is our girl okay? She's perfect. She's right here. She's right here, Allison. She's perfect. Promise me. Allison's voice was fading. Each word cost her something she didn't have left to spend. Like a machine running on the last fumes of the last tank, giving everything it had to keep moving one more second, one more word, one more breath. Promise she gets this. Promise she knows we loved her. I promise. I swear on everything. Allison turned her face toward the camera, toward the future, toward the daughter she would never raise and never hold again after this moment. Baby girl, we love you. We ran to give you a chance. Your name is Grace because it means everything given that isn't earned. Be that baby. Be brave. Be loved. Be whole. Her eyes closed. The machine started screaming. A long, flat, continuous sound that meant the same thing in every language on earth. Cole's voice. No, no, Allison, stay. Please stay, please. The screen cut to black. Grace was sobbing. The kind of sobbing that comes from a place so deep it doesn't make sound at first. Just shaking. Just her whole body trying to contain something too big for a human frame to hold. Too big for 21 years of emptiness to absorb all at once. Flint was crying. Ridge was crying. Torque had turned away because he couldn't watch anymore. Stitch had his head bowed, tears running silently into his white beard. 99 men who had survived violence and prison and loss and decades of hard road stood in a storage unit in Phoenix and shattered. The video resumed. New timestamp, April 3rd, 2004. Later, darker, Cole, alone, holding baby Grace. His face was destroyed, not just from the crash, from grief. The kind of grief that remakes a man's face into something unrecognizable. One arm in a makeshift sling, blood on his shirt, a cut above his left eye held together with butterfly bandages that were losing their hold. But he held his daughter like she was the last precious thing left on earth, because she was Grace. His voice was wrecked but steady, determined. The voice of a man recording the most important words he would ever speak. Words that had to carry across 21 years and land exactly where they needed to land. Your mom didn't make it. The crash, it was bad. Real bad. She held on 3 days to meet you, 3 days. Because she's the strongest person who ever lived and she wanted to see your face. He paused, swallowed, looked directly into the camera with eyes that were red and swollen, but absolutely completely clear. I'm hurt too, baby. Real bad. The doctors, they're saying internal bleeding. Things they can't fix. He stopped, composed himself. The composure of a man who refuses to waste his last moments on self-pity when there are things that need to be said. I'm going to leave you at the hospital. I'm going to make sure you're found. Make sure you're safe. The copperheads can't hurt you if they don't know you exist. And they won't know. I'll make sure of that. He kissed Grace's forehead. On the tiny screen in the dim hospital light, his lips touched his daughter's skin with a tenderness that made the air in the storage unit feel sacred. That made every man present understand they were witnessing something that wasn't meant for them, but was being shared with them because life works that way sometimes. Because sometimes the most private moments become the most public ones. Because sometimes the door to a man's heart opens in front of strangers, and what comes through it belongs to everyone. Flint will find this someday. The bike will lead him. And you'll know you were loved, Grace. So damn loved. Every single day of your life, whether you feel it or not, you were loved. The video ended. The storage unit it was silent except for Grace's breathing, ragged, raw, the breathing of a woman who had just watched her own origin story play out on a screen the size of a playing card, who had just heard her mother's voice for the first time, who had just watched her father hold her and cry and say goodbye and walk toward his own death so she could live. She held the hospital bracelet in one hand, the Polaroid in the other. The bracelet from the end, the photograph from the beginning, 21 years of empty space between them finally filled. He didn't die at the scene, Grace said. Her voice was shredded but working, thinking, processing. Even in the middle of the worst pain she'd ever felt, her brain was doing what it had always done, surviving by solving. He was alive for at least 4 days after the crash. He was in the hospital with her, with me. The newspaper said he died at the scene, Ridge repeated. Then someone lied. Flint's voice had changed. The grief was still there, but something else was pushing through it now. Something harder, something that had spent 21 years waiting for fuel and had just been given more than it could burn in a lifetime. Someone wanted the world to think Cole died on that road. Someone falsified a report. And I want to know who, Ridge said carefully. Flint, if the Copperheads had someone inside the hospital or inside law enforcement, someone who could change records, change dates, make a living, man dead on paper 2 days before he actually died. We don't know that yet, Flint said. Your brother was alive on April 3rd. The newspaper says he died March 30th. You tell me what that means. Ridge had no answer. Nobody did. Grace stood up, hospital bracelet around her wrist now, her mother's bracelet on her daughter's arm. 21 years later, she looked at Flint with eyes that were wrecked from crying, but burning with something that had nothing to do with tears. My parents died protecting me. My father left me at a hospital so the people who killed him would never find me. And he left a trail so that someday someone would find the truth. Flint nodded. We need to know what really happened on that road. We need to know who lied about the date. We need to know who signed that death certificate and why. Ridge was already on his phone, making calls, pulling threads. The kind of man who turns grief into action faster than most people turn grief into words. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the clubhouse. Grace sat at the same scarred table where Flint had received Briggs's call less than 48 hours ago. The table was covered in everything they'd found. The letter, the video camera, the birth certificate, the newspaper clipping, the hospital bracelet, artifacts of a life that had been stolen and a truth that had been buried and was now piece by piece coming back into the light. A woman's voice came through Flint's phone on speaker. Professional measured, but with an undertone that said she cared more than her job description allowed. Say that again, Flint said. For Grace. I pulled the hospital records from Banner Medical Center for March and April 2004. The voice belonged to a paralegal friend of the club, someone who'd called in favors that would take years to repay. Here's what I found. Allison Mercer was admitted March 30th at 11:47 p.m. Severe trauma. Multiple injuries consistent with a high-speed motorcycle accident. She was placed on life support. She did not die on arrival, Grace said. Despite what the police report suggests, no. She was kept alive medically for 3 days. C-section was performed April 2nd at 2:17 a.m. Baby girl, 6 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy, and my father. Silence on the line. The kind that means the next words are going to hurt in a way that doesn't heal fast. Cole Mercer was admitted the same night. March 30th, also severe trauma, internal bleeding, broken arm, 3 fractured ribs, lacerations to his face and torso. He was conscious and coherent for at least 5 days after admission. The hospital records show him visiting Allison's room daily. He was present for the C-section. He held the baby. He signed consent forms on April 3rd. The police report Ridge said his voice like a blade says he died at the scene. The police report is wrong or falsified. Cole Mercer signed a hospital document on April 3rd, 2004. I have a copy of the signature. Flint closed his eyes. April 3rd, his last recorded vital check was April 4th. The woman continued. After that, his file was marked patient discharge. But there's no discharge paperwork, no follow-up appointment, no transfer to another facility, No next of kin notification. He just disappears from the hospital record. He didn't disappear, Grace said. He left. He left me at the hospital and walked out because he knew the copperheads would come looking. And if he was still there when they found him, they'd find me too. That tracks, the paralegal said. Because here's the last piece. And this is the part that made me call Flint the moment I found it. The room went still. Cole Mercer's death certificate, the official one filed with the state of Arizona, was signed by a doctor named Neil Harmon. Who is Dr. Harmon? Grace asked. Flint answered before the paralegal could. His voice flat, dangerous, the temperature of something that's gone past hot into the kind of cold that burns. Neil Harmon was the Copperheads club doctor, treated their guys off the books, patched up gunshot wounds and knife injuries and broken bones from fights, and never reported any of it. He was their man. A Copperheads doctor signed my father's death certificate, Grace said slowly. Every word weighted with the kind of understanding that changes a person permanently. Signed it and dated it. March 30th, the paralegal confirmed. 5 days before your father was last seen alive in the hospital. Ridge picked up a different thread. He'd been making calls all afternoon, pulling records, connecting dots that had been floating in separate orbits for 21 years, and were now finally falling into alignment. There's more, he said. The officer who filed the accident report, Detective Ray Stanton, Maricopa County Sheriff's Department. He's the one who concluded that it was a weather-related accident. No foul play. Flint waited. Stanton retired 3 years later, moved to Nevada, lives in Henderson now. But here's what I found. Ridge lowered his voice, though everyone in the room was already listening. His brother-in-law is Vince Taggart. Flint went rigid, the kind of rigidity that precedes either violence or absolute control, and in Flint's case, both, Taggart Flint said, as in Copperhead Vince Taggart, president of the Copperheads from 2001 to 2014. The detective who ruled your brother's death and accident was married to the sister of the man who ran the club that wanted your brother dead. Everything in the room collapsed into focus, the kind of focus that happens when a blurred photograph suddenly sharpens and you realize you've been looking at the wrong image your entire life. That the picture you thought you understood was actually something else entirely. Grace watched Flint process this. Watch the grief transform into something sharper, something with edges, something that looked like the early stages of a storm that wouldn't stop until it reached the thing that started it. They killed them, Flint said. Not a question. A verdict delivered in a room that wasn't a courtroom, but felt like one. They ran Cole and Allison off the road, and then they had their man inside the sheriff's department write it up as a weather accident, and they had their doctor sign a death certificate with a date that was 4 days early. So nobody would look for Cole. So nobody would know he survived the crash. So nobody would ask questions about what happened to him after he walked out of that hospital. We don't have proof yet, Ridge cautioned. The proof is that my brother was alive on April 2nd, and the report says he died March 30th. The proof is a falsified death date. The proof is a detective with direct ties to the people who wanted Cole dead. Flint's voice was rising. Men turned to look. My brother spent his last days alive in a hospital, watching his wife die, holding his newborn daughter, knowing he was dying too. And nobody came for him. Nobody looked for him because someone made sure the world thought he was already gone. That night, the clubhouse was quiet in the way places are quiet when everyone in them is thinking the same thing, but no one's ready to say it yet. Grace sat with Torque in the garage working on the Harley, her father's Harley, the bike that had started this and would, she was beginning to understand, finish it too. Torque had been working on it during the ride to Phoenix, apparently because pieces that had been rusted solid were now moving. Chrome that had been brown was now silver. The engine, massive and dense and built with the kind of craftsmanship that doesn't exist anymore, sat in the frame like a heart waiting to beat. She needs another 40 hours of work, Torque said. New cables, new brake lines, carburetor rebuild, fluids filters, gaskets. But the engine, he grinned. The engine's solid, Grace. Your dad built this thing to last forever. And damn if he wasn't right. Grace ran her hand along the tank. The letters CJM caught the shop light. Can I help? I know engines. A little. A little is all you need in here. The rest comes from listening. They worked side by side. Torque talked her through every step. carburetor disassembly, compression checks, how to read an engine's history through wear patterns and carbon deposits. Grace's hands remembered. Nolan's lessons from 6 years ago came flooding back like something that had been sleeping in her muscles, waiting for the right hands to wake it up. You've done this before, Torque said, watching her work. A foster father taught me. Long time ago. Good man. She paused. The only one. Torque nodded, understood. Didn't push. You've got good hands, kid. Natural. Your dad would have loved that. She almost lost it again. Held on, focused on the bolt between her fingers. Sometimes survival means keeping your hands busy while your heart puts itself back together. It was past midnight when she found it. She was underneath the frame, checking the routing of the old brake lines, tracing the cable paths the way Nolan had taught her to do before any rebuild. Start at the lever, follow the line, feel for kinks, corrosion wear. Let your fingers read what your eyes can't see in the dark spaces between frame and engine. Her fingers stopped. The front brake line, where it ran along the inside of the fork leg, hidden from view, unless you were lying on your back and reaching up into the cavity with the specific intention of checking it. She felt the end of the cable, felt the way it terminated, and her blood went cold. Torque, her voice was different. Torquey heard it, stopped what he was doing. Come look at this. He got down on the ground beside her. She guided his hand to the spot. Feel that, the end of the front brake line. Feel how it terminates. Torque's fingers explored the cable end. His face changed. The easy expression of a man doing work he loved disappeared and was replaced by something harder. Something that had seen enough sabotage in his 30 years of wrenching to know the difference between failure and intent. That's a clean cut, he said. His voice had dropped to a register she hadn't heard from him before. Dead level, controlled. That cable didn't wear through, didn't snap from fatigue, didn't corrode apart. Somebody cut it, with a blade. One stroke. Grace closed her eyes, felt the severed end of the cable under her fingertip. The edge smooth, precise, deliberate. Hidden by 21 years of rust and grime that had grown over it like scar tissue over a wound, concealing the violence underneath. This wasn't an accident, she said. Somebody cut the front brake line on my parents' motorcycle before they got on the road. They were riding down Interstate 17 in a sandstorm with no front brake. Torque pulled himself out from under the frame, sat up, looked at her with the expression of a man who's just had something confirmed that he hoped wasn't true. In a sandstorm, he said slowly, on a highway, at speed, with a pregnant woman on the back. If you lose your front brake in those conditions, you're not crashing because of weather. You're crashing because someone made sure you would. The Copperheads didn't run them off the road, Grace said. They didn't have to. They cut the brake line before Cole and Allison even left. They knew my parents were running. They knew the route, and they knew that all they had to do was wait. The storm would do the rest, and the crash would look like exactly what the detective wrote in his report. A weather-related accident. Grace, Torque's voice was careful. This is evidence. Real physical evidence. This changes everything. I know. Nobody else found this. Not in 21 years. Nobody thought to check because everybody believed the official story. Weather accident. No foul play. Grace sat up, looked at the brake line in her hand. Nolan's voice in her head as clear as the day he'd said it in a garage in Flagstaff 6 years ago. Broken things aren't trash. They're just waiting for someone stubborn enough to listen to what they need. She'd listened. The bike had told her what it couldn't tell anyone else because no one else had the hands to hear it. No one else had been taught by a quiet man in Flagstaff to feel for the story inside the damage, to read the history written in metal and cable and the invisible language of machines. I need to tell Flint, she said. She found him in the main room. He was sitting alone at the table, the photographs of his brother spread around him like a memorial he couldn't stop building and couldn't stop visiting. She put the brake line section on the table in front of him. He looked at it, looked at her. She told him what she'd found, how the cut was clean, how it was hidden, how someone with access to the bike before Cole and Allison left on March 28th would have needed less than 30 seconds to reach in and sever the cable in a place nobody would think to check. Flint picked up the brake line, held it close to the lamp, saw the edge. Clean. deliberate, unmistakable to anyone who had ever worked on a machine. He set it down, and when he looked at Grace, his eyes had completed a transformation that had been building since Briggs's phone call. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But something else had moved in front of it. Something that didn't have a name, but had a direction. Something that pointed at every person who had touched this conspiracy and said not one more day. The phone rang at 11:47 that night. Flint answered. Briggs's voice came through, and it was a voice Grace had never heard from the old man. Raw, afraid, the fear of a man who's lived long enough to know what real danger sounds like, and is hearing it right now. Flint, someone was here, at the yard, tonight. What do you mean? I mean, somebody broke in, cut the chain on the back gate, smashed every security camera. 3 of them, smashed with something heavy, and then Briggs stopped. The pause was long enough that Flint said his name twice. They painted something on the wall of my office. Inside. They were inside my office, Flint. What did they paint? A copperhead. The snake. Coiled. Black spray paint. And underneath it, one word. What word? Remember. The line hummed with silence. Grace watched Flint's face. Watched the muscles in his jaw work. Watched his hand grip the phone until his knuckles went white. Ridge appeared in the doorway. His face confirmed what Grace already suspected. He'd been monitoring the clubhouse security feeds from his phone. Flint. There was a car, silver sedan, no plates, parked across the street from the clubhouse for 3 hours this afternoon. Left about 20 minutes before we got back from Phoenix. Grace felt the temperature in the room change. Not metaphorically, actually change. The way a room changes when the door to something cold opens and the air rushes in. They know, she said. Flint looked at her. The Copperheads know the bike was found. They know someone's been asking questions. And if they know about the bike, they'll know about me soon. If they don't already. Flint stood up from the table. The movement was slow, deliberate. The movement of a man who'd spent 21 years waiting for this and was not going to waste it by being hasty. I'll put men on you, around the clock. Nobody gets near you without going through us first. Grace shook her head. This isn't a negotiation, Grace. She looked at him, looked at Ridge, looked at the cut brake line still sitting on the table under the lamplight. My father ran to protect me, she said, packed up his pregnant wife and got on a motorcycle with no front brake because he thought running was the only way to keep me alive. And they killed him anyway. They killed both of them. And then they spent 21 years thinking they got away with it. She picked up the brake line, held it in front of her, the evidence that Nolan's teaching had pulled from the grave. I'm not running. My father ran because he had no other choice. I have a choice, I have evidence, I have 99 men, and I have an FBI field office in Phoenix that's open at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Flint studied her, the defiance in her blue eyes, Allison's eyes, the set of her jaw, Cole's jaw, the absolute immovable refusal to be moved by fear. That was the genetic inheritance of 2 people who loved her enough to die for her. He understood then in a way he hadn't fully understood before that Grace Mercer was not a girl who needed protection. She was a woman who needed a direction, and she'd found one. 8 a.m., Flint said. Grace put the brake line back on the table, looked at the wall of photographs, her father's face staring up at her from a dozen different moments of a life she'd never known. They think burying things makes them disappear, she said. They buried the bike. They buried the truth. They buried my parents. And all of it came back, every single piece, because that's what buried things do, Flint. They wait, and then they rise. She walked to the room they'd given her, closed the door, sat on the bed, held the hospital bracelet in one hand and the Polaroid in the other. Outside, the Arizona night pressed against the windows. Somewhere in Nevada, a 71-year-old man named Vince Taggart was sleeping soundly in a bed he'd paid for with blood that wasn't his. Somewhere in Henderson, a retired detective named Ray Stanton was dreaming whatever dreams men dream when they've spent 2 decades pretending a murder was an accident. And in a clubhouse in Arizona, a 21-year-old woman with $60 worth of truth and her father's bike in the garage was about to make sure neither of them ever slept soundly again. The Copperheads moved like men who'd spent decades learning that violence isn't always loud. Sometimes violence wears a suit. Sometimes it makes a phone call. Sometimes it shows up at your door with a smile and a suggestion that sounds like a question, but isn't. The paralegal called Flint 2 days after the storage unit. Her voice had changed. The professional steadiness was gone, replaced by something thinner. Something that had been scraped away by a conversation she didn't want to repeat. "I can't help you anymore," she said. "What happened?" "Someone came to my office yesterday afternoon, 2 men I've never seen before. They didn't threaten me directly. They were very polite about it, complimented the photographs on my desk, asked about my daughter's school, mentioned the name of the school specifically. Then they left. Didn't say another word. Didn't have to." Flint closed his eyes, squeezed the phone until it creaked. "I'm sorry, Flint. I have a child. I can't. I understand." She hung up. Grace watched Flint set the phone down with the deliberate slowness of a man trying not to break something. Not the phone, something inside himself that was already cracked and couldn't take another impact. The next day, Briggs called. His voice had the sound of a man who'd been pushed to the edge of something and was looking down. "They came back," he said. "Different guys this time. Offered to buy the yard. 3 times what it's worth. Cash. Said the offer expires in 48 hours, and after that, the negotiation changes." "You're not selling." "Flint, I've been here 16 years. I lost 3 fingers keeping my mouth shut about things the copperheads wanted to know. I'm 71 years old. I don't have another fight in me." Grace took the phone from Flint's hand. He let her, looked at her with an expression that was half surprise and half something else. Something that looked like recognition. "Briggs, it's Grace, the girl who bought the bike." Silence on the line. "You kept that bike safe for 16 years. You didn't sell it. You didn't scrap it. You didn't touch it even when you didn't know why it mattered. And when I walked in with $60, you could have said no. Could have charged me 75 like you first quoted. But you didn't. You took my 60 and you let me walk out with the only thing that connected me to parents I never knew." Long pause. She could hear him breathing. Could hear the years in that breathing. "Don't let them take that from you now," she said. 48 hours. Give me 48 hours. After that, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But give me the time." Briggs was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he said something that sounded like it cost him every one of his 71 years to produce. 48 hours, kid, not a minute more." Grace handed the phone back to Flint. "We're running out of time," she said. "The paralegal's gone. Briggs is about to fold. They're closing the circle. Every person who helped us is being pressured or bought or scared into silence. And if they get to the evidence before the FBI does, it's over. 21 years of truth and it just disappears again." Ridge appeared in the doorway. His expression had the quality of a man delivering news he wished he didn't have. "There's something else. Finch got approached last night at a bar off Speedway. 2 guys. Offered him $50,000 to take the video camera from the clubhouse and deliver it to a location in Reno." Grace felt something tighten in her chest. Finch was the youngest member of the chapter. 24. Quiet, watchful. The kind of young man who was still deciding who he was going to become. "What did he say?" Flint asked. "He told them to go to hell. Then he came straight here and told me everything. Descriptions, what they were driving, everything. He's solid Flint. He didn't even hesitate." "But they're inside our perimeter now," Grace said. "They know about the video. They know it's here, which means they know what's on it. And they know that tape is the difference between a 21-year-old closed case and a murder charge." She stood up from the table, walked to the garage, looked at her father's Harley sitting on the lift, half restored the letters CJM catching the overhead light. The cut brake line was in a sealed bag on the workbench. The video camera was in Flint's safe. 2 pieces of evidence that could bring down a conspiracy that had been running since before she was born. She made the decision standing there. Made it the way she'd made every important decision in her life. Alone, in silence. With the absolute clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. She walked back to the main room. Flint and Ridge were still talking, planning, debating the safest way to get the evidence to the FBI field office in Phoenix. Flint wanted a full escort. 99 bikes, formation riding, strength in numbers. "No," Grace said. Both men looked at her. 99 Harleys on Interstate 10 heading toward Phoenix. That's not a ride. That's a parade. It's visible from a mile away. It tells the copperheads exactly where the evidence is, exactly what road it's on, and exactly where it's going. You might as well call Taggart and give him the address. Flint's jaw tightened. So what do you suggest? I take it myself. Alone? On the Harley? Absolutely not. One girl on one bike. That's invisible, Flint. That's nothing. That's a 21-year-old riding through Phoenix on a Tuesday morning and nobody looks twice. I've been invisible my entire life. Every foster home, every shelter, every sidewalk I've slept on. The whole world looked right through me like I wasn't there. For 21 years, being invisible was the thing that hurt the most. She paused. Now it's the thing that saves us. Flint stared at her, the argument built behind his eyes. She could see it forming every paternal instinct and protective impulse, and 21 years of guilt about the brother he couldn't save all compressing into the word no. But the word didn't come, because somewhere underneath all of it, in the place where Flint kept the truest things he knew, he understood that she was right. And more than that, he understood that she needed to do this. That this was the moment where Grace Mercer stopped being the girl who was hidden to survive and became the woman who chose to act. Ridge and Torque follow in a separate vehicle, Flint said. Half a mile back, close enough to help if something goes wrong. Far enough to be invisible, too. Grace nodded. That works. They prepped in the morning. Torque finished the critical repairs on the Harley overnight. New brake lines, new cables, fluids, topped, carburetor tuned. The engine fired on the second kick and settled into an idle that sounded like a heartbeat, finding its rhythm after 21 years of silence. Grace put the video camera in a padded bag strapped across her chest. The sealed bag with the cut brake line went into a saddlebag that Torque bolted to the frame. She put on the leather gloves Torque had given her, the helmet from Stitch, the vest that Flint had handed her without ceremony the night before, her name stitched on the back in thread that matched the chapter's colors. Flint walked her to the bike, stood close, his face doing the thing it did when he was trying to say something that didn't fit into words. Your father would have hated this plan. He said, my father cut his own brake line check and missed it. No offense to him, but my plan's better. Flint almost smiled. Almost. The expression got halfway to his mouth before grief caught it and held it back. But his eyes changed, softened in a way that said something pride couldn't say and fear wouldn't let him say, and love was still learning how to say after only knowing this girl for 4 days. Be safe. I'll be smart. Safe is for people with something to fall back on. She kicked the Harley to life. The engine caught and held, strong, steady, live. The sound of it filling the clubhouse parking lot the way her father's voice had filled a hospital room 21 years ago. With purpose, with everything that mattered compressed into a single act of forward motion. She rode out alone. The morning air hit her face through the helmet visor, cool for April, clean in the way desert mornings are clean before the heat builds and the haze settles and the world starts looking tired. She could feel the bike under her the way Nolan had described it once, not as a machine, but as a conversation. The road talking to the tires talking to the frame talking to her hands, and her hands talking back, saying I'm here, saying I hear you, saying let's go. She checked her mirrors every 30 seconds. Habitual. The vigilance of someone who'd spent 21 years watching for the next threat before it arrived. For the first 20 miles, there was nothing. Tuesday morning commuter traffic. Trucks, sedans, minivans with stick-figure families on the back windows. The ordinary, unremarkable flow of people going to jobs and schools and appointments and all the small destinations that make up a life. At mile 23, she saw it, a dark SUV, tinted windows, 3 car lengths back in the right lane. It had been there since the on-ramp at Marana. She changed lanes, the SUV changed lanes. She slowed him down. The SUV slowed down. She sped up. The SUV maintained its distance. 3 car lengths. Exact. Consistent. The precision of someone who'd done this before. Her heart rate climbed. She could feel it in her wrists where they gripped the handlebars. Could feel the adrenaline hit her bloodstream the way fuel hits a carburetor, sudden, hot, transformative. Every instinct she'd built in 21 years of survival was screaming at once. Run. hide, disappear, find a side road and vanish the way you've always vanished when things got dangerous. But running is what her father did. Running is what got him killed. Running is what the copperheads expected because running is what scared people do, and scared people are predictable, and predictable people are easy to catch. Grace was not going to run. She signaled right, took the next exit. A commercial district on the northern edge of Tucson, strip malls, restaurants, a grocery store with a parking lot full of cars and people, and the one thing the copperheads couldn't fight: witnesses. She pulled into the grocery store lot, parked in a space directly under a security camera mounted on a light pole, killed the engine, pulled out the phone Ridge had given her that morning, prepaid untraceable with one number programmed in. Agent Caldwell answered on the second ring. "This is Grace Mercer. We spoke through my uncle's attorney yesterday about the Cole Mercer case. I'm being followed. Dark SUV tinted windows, no front plate visible. I'm sitting in the parking lot of a Fry's grocery store off Cortaro Road. I have the video evidence and the physical evidence from the motorcycle. I need someone here now." "How far are you from our Phoenix office?" Caldwell asked. Her voice was calm in the way that trained people's voices are calm. Not the absence of urgency, but the management of it. 90 minutes. "But I don't think I'll make it there without company." "Stay where you are. Stay in public. I'm dispatching agents from our Tucson satellite office." 20 minutes. Grace hung up, sat on the bike, the engine ticking as it cooled, the padded bag against her chest holding a camera that contained her father's last words and her mother's last breath. The dark SUV pulled into the lot, parked 4 rows away. The engine stayed running. Tinted windows stayed up. Grace watched them. They watched her. And in the space between them, 21 years of buried truth sat like a weight on a scale waiting to tip. Then 2 men got out, both in their 40s, both wearing the kind of clothes that say nothing and mean everything. Clean jeans, dark jackets despite the heat, sunglasses that hid their eyes and gave their faces the flat, unreadable quality of men who've learned to erase their expressions the way accountants erase numbers. They walked toward her. Not fast, not slow. The pace of men who believe the outcome is already decided, and all that remains is the formality of delivering it. Grace didn't move, didn't run, didn't flinch. She stood up off the bike, squared her shoulders, and looked at them the way she'd looked at every threat in every foster home, in every shelter, in every dark hallway she'd ever walked down alone. The look that said, "I see you. I know what you are. And I am not afraid of you because I've been afraid of worse things every day of my life, and fear doesn't work on me anymore." They stopped 10 feet away. The distance of a conversation that isn't really a conversation. One of them spoke. "Nice bike. Thanks. Looks like a lot of money in restoration. Where'd you get it?" "Salvage yard. $60. "Anything else?" The second man took a step forward. "Just one. Testing. That bike has history," he said. "People who care about that history might want it back. Might be willing to make that worth your while." Grace pulled out the phone, held it up so they could see the screen. The call log showing the FBI Phoenix field office number she'd just dialed. "I'm on the phone with the FBI," she said. Her voice didn't shake, didn't waver. Came out of her body with the same steady force as the engine she'd ridden here on. "There's a security camera directly above my head recording everything, and 99 men know exactly where I am and exactly who I'm talking to. So when you go back to Reno and tell Vince Taggart that Cole Mercer's daughter has his brother's last words on video and a brake line that was cut with a blade before that bike ever hit the road, make sure you also tell him this." She looked at the man who'd spoken, held his gaze through his sunglasses, held it until he was the one who looked away. "My father hid me so you couldn't find me. You had 21 years, and you missed. You missed because you forgot that the things you bury have a way of coming back. And I came back, and I'm not going anywhere." They stood there for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then the first man turned, walked back to the SUV. The second followed, doors closed, engine revved. The SUV pulled out of the lot and turned north and disappeared into the Tucson traffic like a stone dropped into a river. Grace sat back down on the bike. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline receding like a tide going out, leaving behind the trembling and the nausea and the sudden overwhelming awareness of what she'd just done. She pressed her palms flat against the tank, felt the metal, felt the letter CJM under her right hand. "I'm okay," she whispered to the bike, to her father, to herself. "I'm okay. We're okay." Ridge and Torque arrived 7 minutes later. They'd been monitoring from the frontage road. Ridge's face was white. "We saw them leave. Are you hurt?" "No, what happened? I told them the truth. Turns out the truth is scarier than anything they brought with them." The FBI agents arrived in an unmarked sedan 12 minutes after that. Two women, both in their 40s, both carrying the weight of federal authority, in the way they moved, in the way they looked at the grocery store parking lot, like they were already cataloging evidence. Grace handed over the video camera, handed over the sealed bag with the cut brake line, signed the chain of custody forms with a hand that had stopped shaking because the shaking was done. She'd done what she came to do. She'd carried her father's truth across 90 miles of desert and delivered it to people who could turn it into justice. Agent Caldwell, the taller of the two, looked at the brake line in the evidence bag, turned it under the light. The clean edge of the cut visible even through the plastic. "This is going to our forensics lab today," she said, "and the video goes to our digital evidence unit for authentication. If the timestamps check out, if your father is on camera live after the date on his death certificate, this isn't a cold case anymore. This is an active murder investigation." "How long?" Grace asked. Caldwell looked at her, saw something in the girl's face that she recognized. The face of someone who's been waiting for the system to work and isn't sure it will, but is giving it one more chance. "I'll push it as fast as I can." 3 weeks later, Agent Caldwell called Flint. DNA confirms it. Grace Mercer is the biological daughter of Cole and Allison Mercer. 99.9% match. Flint put the phone on speaker so Grace could hear. She was sitting at the clubhouse table with grease on her hands from working on the Harley. Her father's Harley, now running for the first time in 21 years. The engine had turned over that morning, had caught and held and rumbled through the garage with a sound that made every man in the building stop what they were doing and listen, the sound of something dead coming back to life, the sound of a promise being kept. "There's more," Caldwell continued. "We exhumed Cole Mercer's remains with a court order. The original autopsy was performed by a county medical examiner who has since been linked to 3 other suspicious rulings involving deaths connected to the Copperheads." Grace's hands went still. "Cole Mercer did not die from crash injuries," Caldwell said. "Cause of death was acute poisoning consistent with a lethal injection administered within hours of death. Someone killed your father in that hospital, Miss Mercer. Likely the same doctor who signed the death certificate with the date that was 4 days early." Grace closed her eyes. She'd known. Somewhere in the place where truth lives before evidence confirms it. Somewhere in the part of her that had watched the video of her father holding her and heard the way he said the words, "I'm hurt too, baby," with the certainty of a man who knew his injuries weren't going to be what killed him. She'd known. The forensic analysis of the brake line confirms deliberate severing. Caldwell continued. "Clean cut, consistent with a blade applied to a tensioned cable, combined with the falsified death certificate, the video evidence placing Cole Mercer alive after his reported date of death, and the documented connections between Detective Stanton and Copperhead leadership. We've presented our findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office." "What does that mean?" Grace asked. "It means federal arrest warrants have been issued for Vince Taggart and Raymond Stanton. Conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, falsification of federal documents." The arrest happened 6 weeks after Grace Mercer bought a $60 motorcycle from a salvage yard in Tucson. Vince Taggart was taken into custody at his home in Reno, Nevada at 7:42 on a Thursday morning. He'd been eating breakfast, eggs and toast, orange juice in a glass that his wife had set on the table the way she set it every morning, because routine is the thing that men who've committed murder hide behind. The ordinary mornings, the eggs, the toast, the way the sun comes through the kitchen window, and everything looks like it's always looked, and nobody would ever guess that the man at the table ordered 2 people killed 21 years ago and never lost a minute of sleep over it. Detective Ray Stanton, retired, was arrested the same morning at a golf course in Henderson, Nevada. He was on the 7th hole. He saw the federal agents walking toward him across the fairway, and he tried to run. Didn't get far. 73 years old with bad knees and a lifetime of sitting behind desks. The agents didn't even hurry. The news coverage was national. Hell's Angels brother, murdered in hospital. 21-year cover-up unraveled by daughter who bought his bike for $60. Every network ran it, every paper printed it. The story Grace had lived in silence became the story the whole country couldn't stop talking about. The girl with $60, the dead motorcycle, the 99 bikers, the father's last video, the mother who held on for 3 days, the brake line that told the truth when every human being involved tried to bury it. Grace didn't watch the coverage. She was in the garage rebuilding the carburetor when Torque came in and told her. They got him. Taggart's in custody. Grace's hand stopped. She held a valve spring between her fingers. Tiny, precise, essential. The kind of small piece that makes the whole machine work. Good, she said. Then she went back to work. You okay? I will be. That's the right answer, kid. The trial took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and evidence reviews and legal motions and the slow grinding machinery of a justice system that moves at its own speed regardless of how desperately the people inside it need it to move faster. Grace testified on a Tuesday in March. Almost exactly 1 year after she'd bought the Harley, she wore the leather vest Flint had given her, the one with her name on the back. She sat in a federal courtroom in Phoenix and told a jury of 12 strangers the story of a girl who spent her last $60 on a rusted motorcycle and found her family inside its frame. The prosecutor walked her through the timeline, the salvage yard, the letters, the ride to the trailer park, the 99 bikes at dawn, the storage unit, the video, the brake line. Why did you buy the bike? The prosecutor asked. Because it looked like me, Grace said. Broken, forgotten, still there. Carl Hagen. No, not Carl Hagen. That was the old name, the name from a story that had been rewritten. Vince Taggart sat 20 feet away, 71 years old, gray, smaller than she'd expected, the kind of old man you'd see at a hardware store on a Saturday morning buying screws. The kind of face that blends into crowds and waits in line at the post office and holds doors open for women with strollers. The man who ordered her parents killed looked like someone's grandfather. That was the hardest part. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like eggs and toast on a Tuesday morning. Sometimes it holds the door for you. Sometimes it smiles. The prosecutor asked Grace about the video, about watching her mother hold her for the first and last time, about hearing her father say goodbye. Did your father know he was going to die? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Grace said. He says it on the video. He knew, and he chose to save me instead of himself. What did he say? His exact words. Grace recited them from memory. She didn't need the transcript. She'd watched that video 100 times, 1,000, until every word was carved into her the way her father's initials were carved into that frame. Until the words weren't something she remembered, but something she carried. Something that lived in her the way her blue eyes lived in her and her blonde hair lived in her and her stubbornness lived in her inherited permanent part of the architecture of who she was. He said, Flint will find this someday. The bike will lead him, and you'll know you were loved, Grace. So damn loved. The courtroom was silent. The jury foreman was staring at his hands. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. Even the court reporter's fingers had stopped moving on the keys. Then the defense attorney stood. A man in an expensive suit who'd been hired to do a job and was going to do it regardless of what it cost the room. Miss Mercer, isn't it true that you have no independent memory of your parents? That everything you know about them comes from a video that could have been staged? That you appeared out of nowhere with a convenient story and a motorcycle club willing to back you up? That the financial resources of the hellsangels Arizona chapter represent a significant inheritance that a young homeless woman might find motivating? Grace looked at him the way she'd looked at the two men in the parking lot, the way she'd looked at every person in her life who'd tried to make her small. She reached into her jacket, pulled out the hospital bracelet, tiny, faded, 21 years old. She placed it on the witness stand. Then she reached into the evidence bag beside her and pulled out the section of brake line. Clean cut, deliberate, unmistakable. She placed it next to the bracelet. This bracelet was on my wrist when I was 3 days old, she said. My mother held on for 3 days with her body broken and her organs failing to put me in this world. She refused to die until I was born. That's not a story. That's a medical record you can verify with Banner Medical Center. She touched the brake line. And this is the front brake cable from my father's motorcycle. I found it myself, lying on my back under the frame at midnight, with grease on my hands, knowledge I got from a foster father who taught me that broken things aren't trash. He taught me to listen to machines, and this machine told me something it couldn't tell anyone else for 21 years. It told me someone cut this cable before my parents got on the road, before they rode into a sandstorm on Interstate 17 with me inside my mother's body. She looked at the defense attorney, held his gaze until he blinked. I grew up eating hot dog wrappers for dinner and sleeping behind laundromats. I aged out of foster care with 3 cardboard boxes and a photograph. I had $60 the day I bought that bike. $60 and nothing else on this earth. That's the inheritance you're suggesting I'm after. That's what you think motivated me to fabricate a 21-year murder conspiracy, $60 in a sleeping bag. She turned to Taggart then, looked at him for the first time, really looked, at the gray hair and the ordinary face and the hands that were folded on the defense table, the way you fold hands in church. My father hid me so you couldn't find me, she said. And it worked. For 21 years it worked. But he left a trail because he knew someday someone would follow it. He buried the truth in a motorcycle the same way you buried his body in a lie. The difference is his truth survived. Yours didn't. She looked at the jury. You want to know what my father taught me through that bike? Through the letters he carved and the video he recorded and the brake line that somebody cut, thinking nobody would ever check. He taught me that buried things don't stay buried. Not truth, not love, not the evidence of what you did to people who never deserved it. You can put 21 years on top of it. You can pile rust and dirt and forged documents and paid-off detectives on top of it. You can bury it so deep you forget it's there. But it waits. And then the right person comes along. The person who's stubborn enough to listen. The person who's been broken enough to recognize what broken looks like. The person who spends her last $60 on something dead because she knows in her bones that it isn't dead. That it's just waiting. She picked up the brake line one last time. My foster father, Nolan, told me something when I was 15 years old. He said broken things aren't trash. They're just waiting for someone stubborn enough to listen to what they need. She set it down. I listened, and the bike told me everything. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Cole James Mercer. Conspiracy in the death of Allison Marie Mercer. Obstruction of justice. Falsification of a death certificate. 25 years to life for Vince Taggart. 15 years for Raymond Stanton. Flint called Grace from outside the courthouse. She'd left before the sentencing. Couldn't stay. Couldn't watch it become official because official meant finished, and finished meant there was nothing left to fight for, and fighting was all she'd known how to do since the day she was born. It's done, Flint said. They're going away. Does it feel like enough? Long pause. The kind of pause that holds an honest answer instead of a comfortable one. No, nothing would feel like enough, but it feels like something. Yeah, Grace said. Something is better than nothing. I've lived on nothing long enough to know the difference. 6 months after the trial, Grace Mercer rode her father's Harley through downtown Tucson with the engine running like a heartbeat that had never stopped. It had just been waiting the way everything in this story had been waiting for the right hands and the right moment and the right girl with $60 and nowhere else to go. The bike was fully restored. Every bolt, every cable, every piece of chrome polished to the kind of shine that catches the sun and throws it back at the world like an argument. The engine turned over first kick every time now. Always did, like the bike knew its purpose and refused to hesitate. She was working full-time at Torque's garage. Started as a helper, became an apprentice, was on her way to becoming a certified mechanic because the thing Nolan taught her in Flagstaff wasn't just a skill, it was a calling. The kind of work that uses your hands and your brain, and the part of you that believes broken things deserve a second chance at motion. You've got the best hands in this shop, Torque told her one morning. And I've been doing this 30 years. She had an apartment, small, clean, hers. The Hellsangels had co-signed the lease when she had no credit history, vouched for her when she had no references, showed up on moving day with trucks and muscle, and the kind of efficient chaos that only a brotherhood of 99 men could produce. Flint hung a framed copy of the Polaroid in her living room, right next to the door. So it was the last thing she saw when she left and the first thing she saw when she came home. So they're always with you, he said. They always were, Grace answered. I just didn't know it. Sunday dinners at the clubhouse became her religion. Not because anyone told her to come, because she wanted to. Because sitting at a long table surrounded by loud men and their louder wives and their kids running between chairs and knocking over drinks felt like the thing she'd been hungry for her entire life. Not food, dough, family, the kind of hunger that no burrito wrapped in foil could fix. The kind that only goes away when you look around a table and realize that every seat is full and one of them is yours. Flint sat at the head. Grace sat to his right. Cole's seat. Nobody had sat in it for 21 years. The men told her that on her first Sunday. Told her with expressions that said this wasn't an assignment or a gesture. It was a recognition, a homecoming, a chair that had been waiting the same way the bike had been waiting, and the truth had been waiting, and Grace herself had been waiting her entire life without knowing what for. Feels right, Stitch said, watching her take her place, his white beard catching the light, his old eyes holding something that looked like a story ending the way it was supposed to. Feels like it was always meant to be. She visited the graves every month. The 15th, Flint's tradition, now hers. He'd been going for 21 years, bringing flowers, sitting on the grass, talking to a brother and a sister-in-law who couldn't answer, but who he believed could hear. Because believing they could hear was the thing that kept him going when nothing else did. Grace brought white flowers, always white, sat on the grass between the headstones and talked. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. It's me again. She told them about the garage, about the bikes she'd fixed, about the first time she rode the Harley alone down a highway at sunset and felt the engine answer her hands like it recognized her touch, like it had been waiting for those specific hands since the day it was built. She told them about the trial, about justice, about the way Flint laughed now, something the men said they hadn't heard in 21 years. He's different, she told the headstones, lighter, like he was carrying something heavy, and he finally set it down. She told them about herself, about how she was learning to trust slowly the way you learn to walk on a leg that's been broken, how it still felt like stepping off a cliff every time she let someone close, how she sometimes woke up at 3 in the morning and reached for the Polaroid before remembering she didn't need to carry it in her pocket anymore because it was framed on her wall, safe, permanent, home. I'm getting there, she said. Not fixed, not yet, but getting there. She was riding through Tucson on a Tuesday afternoon. Ordinary day, ordinary ride. No destination, just the road and the engine and the wind and the feeling of moving forward that had become the closest thing to prayer she'd ever known. Then she saw the girl, sitting on a curb outside a gas station on the east side of town, backpack on the ground next to her stuff so full the zipper was straining. Everything she owned packed into one bag because that's what you do when everything you own fits in one bag. 15, maybe 16. Dark circles under her eyes. Clothes wrinkled in the way clothes get when you've been sleeping in them for days. Scanning every passing car with the hyper-vigilance of someone who'd learned early that the world was not a safe place, and the safest thing to do was watch everything and trust nothing. Grace knew that posture, knew it in her muscles and her bones and her survival brain. She'd sat on that curb, she'd been that girl. She'd scanned those cars with those eyes, and held that backpack with those hands, and told herself she was fine with that same tight jaw and those same locked shoulders. She pulled over. Killed the engine. The sudden silence made the girl look up. You okay? The girl's walls went up. Grace could see it happen, the shutters closing behind her eyes, the jaw tightening, the body language shifting from vulnerable to defended in half a second. The speed of it told Grace everything. Walls that go up that fast have been practiced. Walls that go up that fast have been needed. I'm fine. Yeah, Grace said. She didn't move closer, didn't push, just stood next to the bike and let the silence do the work. I used to be fine too. That kind of fine where you haven't eaten since yesterday and you're trying to figure out where to sleep tonight and you're telling yourself it's going to be okay because the alternative is admitting it's not. The girl's lip trembled, just for a second, just enough for Grace to see. Then she caught it, held it, pushed it back down into whatever place she kept the things she couldn't afford to feel. What do you want? Nothing. I just know what it looks like where you are right now. I've been there. You don't know anything about me. I know you haven't eaten. I know that backpack has everything you own. I know you aged out of something or ran from something, and now you're doing the math on how long you can survive on whatever's left. The girl stared at her. The walls cracked. Not much, just a fissure, just enough for something real to show through. I aged out 4 months ago, the girl whispered. I've been. She stopped. Couldn't finish. I know, Grace said gently. I know exactly. Because a year ago I was sitting on a curb just like that one. $60 to my name. No family, no phone, no one. And I spent my last money on a broken motorcycle because it was the stupidest, most irrational thing I could have done. And it saved my life. The girl looked at the Harley. Chrome gleaming, engine still ticking as it cooled. The letter C, JM visible on the frame. Nice bike, it was my dad's. He hid it to protect me before I was even born. And 21 years later, I found it in a salvage yard for $60. That doesn't make any sense. None of it makes sense. That's the whole point. The things that save us never make sense. They just show up when we've stopped expecting them, looking nothing like what we thought salvation was supposed to look like. Grace held out her hand. I'm Grace. The girl hesitated. Every instinct fighting the gesture. Every lesson the system had taught her about trust, every time she'd reached for someone and grabbed empty airs, every night she'd fallen asleep telling herself that needing people was weakness. And weakness was the thing that got you hurt. Lily, she said finally, took Grace's hand. Quick grip, quick release. But contact, real contact. The first in who knows how long. You hungry, Lily? Lily nodded, couldn't speak. The nod cost her everything she had because admitting hunger meant admitting need, and admitting need meant admitting she couldn't do this alone, and that was the hardest thing a foster kid could ever say. Harder than goodbye. Harder than I'm scared. Harder than anything because it meant opening a door that had been slammed shut so many times the hinges were bent and the frame was cracked, and every part of her believed that opening it again would only lead to the same empty room it always led to. Come on, Grace said, gestured to the back of the bike. I know some people. No questions, no paperwork, no system. Just food and a place to figure out what comes next. Why you don't even know me. Someone did this for me. 99 someones, actually. They showed up when I had nothing. They didn't ask for credentials or a background check or a reason to care. They just showed up. That's how it works. You don't earn it. You just receive it. And then someday when you're standing where I'm standing, you pass it on. Lily picked up her backpack, slung it over one shoulder, looked at the bike, looked at Grace, looked at the road behind her, the direction she'd been running from, and then at the road ahead. The direction she'd never been brave enough to face because facing forward means hoping, and hoping means risking. And risking means trusting that the next hand you reach for won't let go. She climbed on. Grace kicked the Harley to life. The engine caught first try. Always did. Like the bike knew its purpose and refused to hesitate. Like it understood that its job wasn't finished. That the legacy of a father who hid it to protect his daughter didn't end with one girl saved. It continued every time someone broke and climbed on and held on and let themselves be carried towards something they couldn't see yet but could feel. Lily's arms wrapped around Grace's waist, thin, shaking, holding on the way people hold on when they've forgotten what it feels like to be carried. When the sensation is so unfamiliar, it almost hurts. When trust is so new it doesn't fit right yet, like borrowed clothes that haven't shaped to the body, but you wear them anyway because the alternative is standing in the cold. They rode toward the clubhouse, toward the long table and the loud voices and the place where Flint would look at this terrified girl and see what he'd seen in Grace. Not a problem to solve, not a case to manage, not a file number or a placement or a temporary arrangement. A person who was worth stopping for. Grace's voice carried over the engine, over the wind, over the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. Broken bikes and broken people, Lily. Same thing. In the right hands, they both get a second chance to run. The engine roared, a rituan. The road opened, the sun hit the chrome and turned 3 carved letters into gold. CJ, a father's mark, a daughter's inheritance. A promise kept across 21 years, $60, and 99 strangers who refused to let a girl stay invisible. Grace Mercer spent her last money on a dead machine, found her family inside its frame, found justice in its secrets, found herself in its resurrection. And now she was doing the only thing that mattered more than being saved. She was saving someone else, because that's what Cole and Allison Mercer died for. Not so their daughter could survive, so she could live. And living real, living the kind that means something, the kind that echoes, means reaching back for the person still sitting on the curb, still hungry, still scared, still whispering, "I'm fine," to a world that forgot to ask. Grace didn't forget. She never would.